Hello, everyone. Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn as Yuji Itadori, Part 1. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
In the vastness of endless space, a space station floated beside a colossal blue planet, the planet where evolution became the main factor that differentiated it from most others. The planet Earth. But this small planet was irrelevant at the moment. The true focus was on an astronaut, who, outside the space station, was too busy with some wires in his hands, using pliers to cut and reconnect them. While other astronauts were too busy relaxing inside the station or occupied with their own business, a single astronaut was doing maintenance outside. But, while most people would be annoyed to do the work alone, that astronaut couldn't care less. In fact, he enjoyed going out of the station, letting himself float in space while he had the opportunity to look at the immense blue planet he knew as home. It was refreshing. The infinite stars cover all the darkness of that space, close enough to see them but far enough to know they might never be able to reach them. Scary, but at the same time, intriguing. "How are you doing, Mark?" Mark, the astronaut outside, suddenly blinked when a voice sounded in his headset, immediately recognizing the voice of the woman responsible for monitoring him while he was doing maintenance. "Bella. I thought you had abandoned me out here. I was getting lonely." Mark joked with the woman, hearing a sigh from the other side of the line. "Stop joking, besides, you hate it when I interrupt your music." Mark, who couldn't deny that fact, just focused back on the wires in his hands, briefly returning to answer the woman's first question. "I had to change the communication system wires. For some reason, they were in a deplorable state," he reported and, not hearing any response from the other side, closed the panel in front of him when he finally finished. "I'm returning to the interior of the station," he declared, not waiting for a response as he started moving toward the station's entrance. But, while Mark thought his return would be like the hundreds of times he had done it, something strange caught his attention. A light, one so faint it could easily disguise itself as a star, but Mark easily noticed it. This made him frown. After all, a strange light in the middle of the void of space was not really something common to see. So, spotting something like that was intimidating, even for someone like him, who had risked his life just to get to space. "Bella, tell me, you're seeing this too, right?" he asked with a bit of tension. He couldn't be going crazy. Living in space could make astronauts paranoid, but Mark was someone who never had problems with that. "Mark, return immediately." Receiving a response, his eyes widened upon noticing the urgency in the voice of the woman he knew as the calmest person on the station. This made him move immediately. But, making him freeze, his eyes widened as that strange light suddenly expanded, growing to become even larger than the space station. Damn! He realized that whatever was happening, it was not orchestrated by humans in any way. Because in the next moment, that light, which had been at a safe distance, suddenly appeared in front of the station, moving closer and closer as it threatened to engulf it. Mark, completely ignoring the desperate screams in his headset, stared at that light with a frightening fascination. His eyes now emitted a strange glow, the glass of his helmet preventing his face from being seen. So this is it? Taking his attention away from the light that was centimeters away from engulfing him completely, he gave one last look at the planet Earth. Mark had a peaceful life. He graduated, married a beautiful woman, and got to work in his dream job at 27. He had no regrets, and death did not scare him. The only thing he might have wanted at that moment was the chance to say goodbye to the important people in his life. But unfortunately, as his body was engulfed by that light, he realized that this would be impossible. So he could only be content with what he had at the moment. His last memories of the great life he had. Well, I couldn't have asked for anything better. As his face was about to be engulfed, a confident smile appeared on his lips. "Bring it on." Silence. On July 23, 2028, the space station and its crew had completely vanished. Good morning. With a strange voice greeting him, a drowsy Mark slowly opened his eyes, his head lifting to find a figure in front of him, his vision blurry enough that he was unable to distinguish its features. Ugh. What the hell happened? Muttering, the confusion in his head prevented him from noticing when his words came out completely different from what he was used to. You are in a rather delicate situation, let me introduce myself. Mark closed his eyes for a moment, opening them so his vision was finally clear. I am Gojo Satoru, a teacher in charge of freshmen at the College of Magical Techniques. Now, answer me, which one of them are you now? Mark could barely remember the contents of the conversation he had with Gojo Satoru. In fact, he felt he acted more automatically than anything else. It was all still very unreal to him. Execution, sukuna, and curses. He knew the origins of these terms. Jujutsu Kaisen. An anime that one of his fellow space station crew members insisted he watch. Eventually, with not much else to do, Mark decided to give it a chance. He found the plot interesting and committed to watching it in full. Unfortunately, the phenomenon that dragged him into this world had arrived before he could complete the story. Sitting on the couch in his home, Mark looked at his hands with interest, his teeth clenching as a bolt of pain shot through his head. Even knowing that he was now in a fictional world, this was not the main fact that shook him. But rather, he had now become a completely different person. He had become Yuji Itadori, the main protagonist of the story. He had become Sukuna's vessel, someone destined to suffer from the beginning to the end of the story. This was the main fact that left him so shaken. Damn. Holding his head, he gritted his teeth as a powerful pain threatened to explode his head. From the moment he found himself in this world, memories of Yuji's life invaded his head. He was able to detail each of Yuji's birthdays, and this was not pleasant at all. So much information invading his mind caused unbearable internal pain, to the point that he almost fainted countless times during the day. Fortunately, Mark had a certain tolerance for headaches due to his job, so he was able to endure. But still, it was irritating to receive a load of memories followed by a sharp pain. This time, the memories of Yuji and Megumi's confrontation with a curse at school, followed by Yuji swallowing one of Sukuna's fingers, invaded his thoughts. They seemed to be the last memories he would receive. Receiving Yuji's memories was strange. It seemed to somehow alter his own personality. From what he had noticed, he didn't share Yuji's thoughts or share the same body. He had completely taken over the boy's body for himself, leaving only his memories behind. But still, it seemed to affect Mark somehow. The boy's sense of justice was strong enough to merge with Mark's own sense of justice. Even having taken over Yuji's body, Mark could say that the boy hadn't disappeared completely. He now, in a way, was part of Mark himself. Relaxing his body when the pain finally disappeared, Mark, now Yuji, looked up at the ceiling with a downcast expression. At this moment, he didn't know what to do. Having extensive knowledge about his own future in that world, there were many things to do, but was that really what he wanted? Mark had a peaceful life before being swallowed by that strange light. He didn't have to deal with anything like what this world had to offer. Even though for many, living in an anime world would be like a dream, Mark still hadn't entirely accepted this fact. Dealing with Kenjaku and other curses trying to bring Sukuna back, while, in the process, tormenting him by killing his allies, was not something Mark desired. But still, he didn't just want to give up. Having received a chance to live in another world, he wanted to make the most of it and not just be a slave to fate. He still had hesitation in his heart, but he knew that simply waiting and hoping everything would resolve itself wouldn't happen. He needed to act, he needed to decide. And even not knowing if this was really the right decision to make, he decided to take the safe path. He would follow Gojo Satoru to the Jujutsu school. Sitting on park benches, Itadori and Gojo were side by side as the younger one stared at a strange finger with disgust on his face. After sharing with Gojo his desire to help people, Gojo promptly gave him one of Sukuna's fingers that he possessed. The dialogues from the original story were not something Yuji could remember clearly, but based on the personality of the former Itadori, he was able to respond sincerely, which fortunately made Gojo not suspect anything. Besides, it wasn't like Gojo knew Itadori well enough to suspect his change in personality. Damn, this is gross. Yuji, looking at that demonic finger, couldn't help but point out. Yuji, even with the former Itadori's memories fresh in his mind, still hesitated to swallow that finger. Space food was bad, but nothing compared to swallowing a corpse's finger. Damn. But, closing his eyes, he simply threw the finger into his mouth, swallowing it whole. The sensation of the finger scraping down his throat made him frown in disgust. But before he could think about how gross it was, his eyes widened as a powerful energy surged through his body. Yuji could clearly feel the absurd increase in power his muscles received for a moment, that strange energy coursing through his body wildly. So much energy. I can clearly feel this monstrous power. But, just as the power had suddenly appeared, it disappeared in the blink of an eye, leaving Itadori clenching his fists as he made sure to remember that sensation. This power. If I can assimilate it, can I increase the level of my cursed energy? The former Yuji was originally able to use cursed energy, but I don't remember him matching Sukuna's power according to the fingers he consumed. Itadori frowned. If I can do that, I can change everything. My life will become infinitely more peaceful. Gojo smiled as he saw how the boy just returned to normal after swallowing another finger. He realized that Itadori was definitely a talent that only appeared once in 1,000 years. I imagine everything is fine now, right? Gojo asked, Yuji standing up while looking at his fists with a strange interest. While the former Itadori's memories mingled with his own, he was far from being like the former owner of this body. He had his own thoughts regarding his execution, and even with the boy's memories affecting his personality, he was not as altruistic as Yuji. He would not accept his execution. If he had to completely subdue Sukuna to continue living, then he would find a way to make it happen. If in the future the higher-ups still wanted his death, then he would kill each one of them. But for now, his main goal was to become strong enough so that one day, he could say those words out loud. Yes. Turning to Gojo, Yuji smiled determinedly, his eyes emitting a glow that drew a smile from the strongest sorcerer. Let's go. Very well, then let's go. Clapping his hands, Gojo stood up. It seems you two are finished. Surprised by a new voice, Itadori turned to see Megumi standing right behind him. How stealthy. Oh, Fushiguro. You look better. Yuji smiled upon seeing Toji's son. At least, much better than the last time I saw you. You looked quite down. I'm recovering. Megumi sighed, his eyes resting on Itadori for several seconds. Itadori. You seem to have changed a bit. Yuji was taken aback by those words but quickly hid his reaction, a nervous smile appearing on his lips as he scratched his neck. Well, knowing I'm destined to be executed can change someone's perspective on life. I can understand that. Well, since everything is settled, let's go. Turning, Gojo signaled for the two to follow him. The two teenagers exchanged glances for a moment before following the man. Looking at the gigantic school that resembled a sanctuary in the middle of the mountains, Itadori couldn't help but marvel. Seeing it on an anime screen could never compare to seeing the place in person. Being there, seeing the real Jujutsu school in front of him, made him understand that it was indeed real. But it was still a surreal sight to his eyes. Oh, I forgot to tell you, but you'll have an interview with the school's principal, Gojo, who was walking beside him, suddenly said, catching Yuji's attention. And if you fail, you won't be able to transfer, so do your best. Raising his thumb to encourage him, Gojo flashed a small smile as he continued on the path. I think this shouldn't be information left for the last minute. Seeing the sorcerer smile, Itadori couldn't help but think about him. Gojo was strange, to say the least. Itadori didn't know him well enough to describe him accurately, but he could say that the man was certainly a good person. Of course, he knew his personality from the anime, but watching someone and knowing them in person were completely different things. It was a pity to know what his fate should be in that world. Aside from your strength, you're pathetic. Itadori, surprised when a new voice suddenly emerged, felt something strange on his cheek, his fingers moving to find a slit resembling a mouth. And he immediately realized who had interrupted the conversation. Hey, you weirdo! Get out of my face! Hitting the mouth with a slap, it seemed to disappear. Sukuna was still a mystery to Itadori. The most powerful curse had not yet tried to contact him, and this was the first time he had any form of interaction. He feared that Sukuna had access to his thoughts and memories, but if that were the case, Itadori believed he would at least make some comment about it. But for now, it was as if the two, despite Sukuna being imprisoned in his body, were separated in different rooms. Sorry about that, it's the first time he's manifested like this. Feeling his hand tingle and a strange sensation course through his body, he concluded that it could only be a small amount of cursed energy flowing through him. And seeing how Sukuna's mouth seemed to form on his hand, he should be right. But as Sukuna seemed to want to say something, Itadori just slapped his mouth again, making him disappear. Even being unable to manifest outside, it seemed that Itadori could still contain him without many problems. Perhaps in the future, he could use cursed energy from his own body to prevent any form of manifestation, but until then, slaps should suffice. You seem to be handling Sukuna well, Gojo commented while looking at Itadori with interest. Scratching his chin, Yuji sighed in dismay. Well, he didn't make much difference until a few minutes ago. Maybe the biggest nuisance is that because of him, I'm now destined to be executed. By the way, was this guy really strong? Gojo nodded. The double-faced specter is a fierce god imagined to have 4 arms and 2 heads, but in fact, he was a human who lived about 1,000 years ago. When magic was at its peak, shamans gave their all to defeat him but failed. He made a name for himself and eventually died. But even after death, the shamans were unable to eradicate his body, covered in cadaveric wax, which came to our world in the form of cursed objects. He is strong and, undoubtedly, the king of curses. Finally reaching the school premises, the two continued to the entrance. At his peak, would you be able to win? While Itadori knew the outcome, he wanted to hear Gojo's opinion. It would be a little complicated, but I would win. Saying those words confidently, Gojo opened the door for Itadori to pass through. Late again, Satoru. 8 minutes late. Sitting on the floor, the principal of the Jujutsu school seemed focused on sewing a strange doll, with numerous odd stuffed animals around him. Damn, this is even more ridiculous in person. It's a habit I can't criticize, but I can ask you to correct. If you can't, then don't criticize. Sighing, Gojo motioned for Itadori to continue. In the end, you spent this time making dolls. Finally finishing sewing the doll in his hands, Yaga raised it to look at it more closely. And the boy? Perceiving this as a cue to introduce himself, Itadori stepped forward and bowed almost automatically, a greeting ingrained in his body, even though Itadori in his former life wasn't Japanese. My name is Yuji Itadori, I'll be in your care. Yaga didn't seem impressed with anything about Yuji, his expression hardening as he seemed about to start the test. Why did you come here? Itadori froze for a moment, clearly thoughtful about the question. He had already thought about this question. Why exactly was he there? He could just stay hidden, try to escape all this mess, or even let Sukuna act freely. But he had chosen to follow the original path. Why exactly? Yuji had asked himself that a few times on the way to the school, and in the end, he always came to the same answer. A simple answer, but it was sincere. Because I don't want to die. Yuji, above all, was still a normal person in both lives. He feared death like anyone else, and after getting a second chance, the last thing he wanted was to waste it by dying. He wouldn't allow it at all. Is that it? Yaga, who listened to that answer with little interest, raised his hand to make room for a large doll that appeared beside him. Develop that answer, and do it while facing this cursed body. With the doll exploding towards his opponent, Itadori immediately raised his defense to block a punch. Oh, and her name is Cassie. Boom. Being thrown away by the force of the punch, Yuji gritted his teeth as he got up. You don't want to die, you say? Many people don't want to die in this world. Becoming a sorcerer will only make that goal more difficult. Maybe the best option is just to accept execution. Jumping away to escape an attack, Itadori went into a guard stance as his brow furrowed with Yaga's words. I know that not wanting to die is not a noble goal. Hitting the doll with a punch, his eyes widened when the cursed body ricocheted off the wall and hit him directly in the stomach, his body flying backward until it hit the wall. But it works for me at the moment. Spitting a little blood on the ground, he got up in time to roll to the side to escape a punch. Even though fighting in his former life wasn't his interest, his wife had still made him take self-defense classes with her. With the memories of the former Yuji and his own, he was confident in holding his own in a fight. But still, fighting against a cursed body was something very difficult for him, who couldn't even use cursed energy. Being hit by another punch, Itadori grabbed the doll and threw it away. If I have to gain strength to achieve this goal, then no matter how many bones I break in the process, I will do it. Seeing the doll exploding towards him, he jumped to escape at the last second. I want to be strong enough to choose how I will die. Boom! Receiving a precise punch on the chin, a furious Itadori turned to the doll and knocked it to the ground, hugging it with all his strength while biting its head. It was never my intention to get into this mess, but since I'm here, I will eat Sukuna's pieces, and I won't leave my fate in the hands of others. Receiving a headbutt from the doll, veins bulged on Itadori's forehead, his grip tightening as he began to twist the doll violently. Yaga, hearing that answer and seeing the determination in the boy, smiled with satisfaction. Satoru, show him the dormitory and then explain to him about security. You passed. Welcome to the Jujutsu school. Cursed energy was a strange concept. Unlike other fictional types of energy like ki or chakra, cursed energy had an additional level of complexity. Yuji vaguely remembered Gojo Satoru's explanation in the original storyline, where he compared cursed energy to electricity. Itadori couldn't say if that was the best comparison to use for this energy, as even though he followed the anime and manga, he was never one to pay much attention to the details. Simply put, he understood how the energy theoretically behaved, but he didn't feel he would be able to manipulate it anytime soon. In his previous life, he was an intelligent man, quite talented for his age, but that was far from meaning he could work a miracle and learn to use this type of energy in a single day. It was a concept too new for him, requiring not only meticulous control of this new energy in his body but also control of his own emotions, all done simultaneously. Cursed energy, reverse cursed energy, and cursed techniques. These were various concepts that, although originating from the same energy, worked differently. Understanding all of this in less than a day was far beyond his current capabilities. Sitting on the bed in his new dormitory, Itadori had his eyes closed, his expression quite troubled. But that didn't mean he couldn't try. Because even if he couldn't use it now, he could at least learn to discern the energy flowing through his body. Like a new strange sensation coursing through his body, he could deduce that this was cursed energy. Since swallowing the second finger of Sukuna, he had been able to feel this strange sensation, as if something were being pumped from his stomach to the rest of his body. He had tried to manipulate it a few times since then, but it was like trying to peel off his own skin with his fingers. Maybe during combat, he could gain a better understanding of it, but until then, he felt it was the most he could do. With a sigh escaping his lips, Itadori lay down. There's no point in trying too hard. I'd better rest for tomorrow. He feared being as helpless as the original Itadori was when facing the special grade curse at the beginning of the storyline. The last thing he wanted was to be forced to switch with Sukuna because of it. There was no way he would accept Sukuna's proposal to revive him. Preventing that from happening was important, as it would avoid many problems in the future. Maybe I should just tell Gojo what's going to happen. This was also a possibility that came to Itadori's mind, but he would be lying if he said he wasn't afraid of what might happen if he did. Telling Gojo Satoru that he somehow had knowledge of future events, despite possibly solving some problems, could lead to even bigger issues. After all, there was no way to know how Gojo would react, especially upon discovering that Kenjaku now possessed the body of his deceased friend. In the worst case, his sealing could happen even sooner, which would be an outright defeat for the sorcerers. Damn. I'll think about it tomorrow. But Itadori preferred to put that matter aside for now. He wanted to see how far he could get without Gojo's help. At the very least, he needed to learn how to use the cursed energy in his body before facing the special grade curse. If he couldn't, he would only be signing his death warrant by entering that reformatory. You're really hungry. At a restaurant in the Harajuku district, Itadori and Megumi were busy with their own meals. I haven't eaten anything since yesterday. Itadori, who had used an excuse just to try traditional Japanese food for himself, was entirely focused on devouring the dish in front of him. I clearly remember smelling instant noodles in the dorms. Megumi frowned, easily identifying the lie in his words. You must have dreamt it. Finishing his meal, Itadori wiped his mouth and stood up, Megumi following him out of the establishment. Hey! I asked you to wait. In the distance, Gojo appeared among the crowd, Itadori and Megumi turning to see him. Sorry, Gojo-sensei. Itadori wanted to eat something before we met with the transfer student. Megumi explained, making the teacher nod in agreement. Oh, right. Itadori, who seemed to remember something, suddenly pulled something from a bag in his hand, turning to hand it to Gojo. I bought some sweets for you, sensei. Gojo, taking the packaged sweets, gave a small smile. Thank you for the consideration. Opening one of the sweets, he quickly put it in his mouth, turning his head to Itadori. Looks like your uniform is ready. Wearing a uniform no different from the original, Itadori looked at his clothes. He liked the look, so he was quite satisfied with the outfit. Yes, it's quite nice. Well, if you want to change anything, just ask. Itadori nodded in agreement. Oh, it looks like she's here. Hearing the teacher's words, Itadori and Megumi turned to see a girl with short brown hair seeming to argue with a man. So that's the transfer student? Itadori, even knowing the answer, asked more as a way not to seem too indifferent. She seems lively. I feel like this one's going to be troublesome. Megumi commented with a sigh. Hey, over here. Gojo, ignoring his student's comments, called the girl, who immediately noticed him. Approaching the group, the girl stopped in front of them, her hand on her hip while her face filled with pride. My name is Nobara Kujisaki. I am the beautiful flower in a group of merry boys. Ugh. Megumi murmured, while Itadori seemed quite indifferent to the girl's presence. Itadori didn't have much to say about Nobara. He thought she was a good person, but he didn't pay much attention to her when he watched the anime. He was a little shocked by her death, but it didn't go much beyond that. My name is Yuji Itadori. Itadori introduced himself with a friendly smile. A stark contrast to Megumi, who seemed completely uninterested in the situation. I'm Fushiguro Megumi. I see I wasn't very lucky. With a sigh, Nobara looked disheartened. Itadori blinked at this attitude. What was she expecting? Looking at that building exuding cursed energy from its interior, Itadori swallowed hard. Looks like I'm going to be put to the test. When Nobara came up with a plan that involved splitting up, Yuji didn't object. He remembered that none of the curses in the building were capable of posing a threat to them, so he saw no need to take longer than necessary. Walking down a corridor, Itadori looked around with interest, his grip on the knife in his hand always firm so he could be ready to strike back at any moment. For his first field test, Gojo had given him a knife imbued with cursed energy, as curses couldn't be destroyed with just his punches. While using a knife wasn't something he was used to, he still preferred it to only fighting physically. With his supernatural physique and eventual ability to imbue objects with cursed energy, he saw himself improving his combat abilities astronomically. The real Yuji would have preferred to fight with his fists rather than use weapons, but Mark, now Yuji Itadori, liked the idea of a balance between the two. After all, in a fistfight, a weapon would make all the difference. He wouldn't have to rely solely on his fists, nor would he have to depend entirely on a weapon. Widening his eyes when the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, Itadori immediately propelled himself forward in time to dodge a sneak attack. That was close. Turning around, his vision landed on what looked like a curse that vaguely resembled a grasshopper, its pincers instead of hands appearing as sharp as real blades. This will be a good way to try and awaken my manipulation of cursed energy. Raising his blade, Itadori prepared himself as the curse began to charge towards him. Killing curses was a topic Itadori had stopped to discuss in his mind. How should he feel about doing it? After all, some of them were sentient enough to not be so different from ordinary humans. It was a solid attack on his morals because despite everything, they were just beings created by the human's own fears and negative emotions. None of them had asked to be born this way. Blocking an attempt to pierce him, Itadori grabbed the curse's arm and easily threw it away. But as much as Itadori tried to convince himself of these words, as if he were trying to make himself a good Samaritan, he couldn't care less about this sort of thing. His character was good, he knew he was a good man who didn't mind helping as long as he had the time. But his morality was like that of any other person who understood how bad the world he lived in was. If a serial killer or rapist were sentenced to death, Itadori was like millions of others who would simply turn to the television and say, "Well, that's great. They won't hurt anyone anymore." Itadori was the kind of person who, if he had the means to defend himself and others during a robbery, wouldn't hesitate to do so, not caring if the thief had a family to return to. He was someone who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate something threatening his life. Dodging a stab, Itadori advanced towards the curse and stabbed its head, the blade easily piercing the creature's skull before it collapsed lifelessly to the ground. Damn! Placing his foot on the creature's head, Itadori sighed in disappointment. It was too weak. Feeling a strong presence behind him, Itadori was surprised to turn and see a corridor infested with curses, his grip on his blade tightening as he prepared with a small smile forming on his lips. Looks like this is just getting started. Walking down the corridor after eliminating dozens of curses, Itadori looked around while noticing the faint traces of cursed energy throughout the corridor. After concentrating for a while, he finally managed to do it, using this new ability to hunt the remaining curses. This didn't give him a greater understanding of cursed energy, but it would be useful in the future when he encountered Mahito. If possible, he wanted to eliminate that curse in their first meeting. "I'm unarmed. Let the boy go." Hearing a muffled voice from the other side of a wall, Itadori quickly recognized it as Nobara's. "Oh, I almost forgot about the boy held hostage." Narrowing his eyes, Itadori focused on discerning the cursed energy of the curse on the other side, his vision slowly forming a large energy signature on the other side of the wall. Found it. Boom! Stabbing the wall with his blade, Itadori destroyed the wall separating him from the curse, his blade piercing the creature's skull before it could react. With the curse falling lifelessly to the ground, Itadori crouched beside the frightened boy used as a hostage. "It's okay now, kid. No monsters will hurt you." "Damn, how the hell did you go through that wall like it was nothing?" Nobara, despite not showing it, felt relieved with Itadori's arrival. Having a boy die on her first day would have been a severe blow to her confidence. "I ate my vegetables when I was younger." Picking up the child, Itadori approached Nobara with a mocking smile. "Maybe we shouldn't have split up after all." Nobara frowned at his words. "What? Do you think I didn't handle it well on my own?" "I do." "Shut up, idiot." With a sigh, Nobara crossed her arms as she approached. "Damn, anyway, I'm grateful to you." Messing up the boy's hair, Nobara gave a small smile. "Even if I could survive, I wouldn't have such a bright future." "Thank you." Turning to Itadori, Nobara gave a smile full of gratitude. Thump. "Damn, I guess all that food didn't sit well with me." When Itadori asked Satoru Gojo himself for a manual on the use of cursed energy, he didn't expect to receive something so soon. However, not everything was perfect. The book provided by Gojo could not be described as a manual but rather, more accurately, a history book. Being able to read its entire contents in just a few hours, Yuji noticed that it only covered what cursed energy was used for and included a few technical examples of how to use it. But he wouldn't complain about that. Technical details, no matter how minimal, would already be a great help to him. A manual would be preferable, but in the end, Itadori didn't believe he could use cursed energy in a fight so soon. However, to survive his battle against the special grade curse, maybe he could at least protect his body with a layer of energy. Even if he couldn't control it properly, he hoped to at least be able to cover his body by expelling some of this energy, even if crudely. Maybe then he would have some chance against the special grade curse. Standing in his dormitory, Itadori had his hands together in front of his abdomen, his breathing slow but deep. In his former life, he had learned to meditate as a form of internal regulation. It helped him get used to zero gravity in space and stay calm in risky situations. At the moment, he used it to discern the cursed energy being pumped through his body, in which he was making considerable progress. He had already been able to use cursed energy perception to the point of discerning energy remnants, which, by itself, was great progress. At that moment, he was trying to release that energy traveling through his body somehow. But something was impeding his progress, something he couldn't identify. As an adult, he had excellent control over his emotions, and he didn't believe he needed to undergo the same training as Yuji, but still, something was preventing his release of cursed energy. Could it be Sukuna? Frowning, he considered this idea. Unlike the original Itadori, he was treating Sukuna with the minimum possible respect, trying to prevent any communication through the appearance of his mouths. To be honest, Itadori didn't like Sukuna at all. As a spectator, he could appreciate him as a great villain, but now, in Itadori's skin, he could only despise him. Of course, he could respect him as a powerful being and even fear his strength, but he couldn't help but see him as a nuisance. Having someone who would take any chance to screw him over sharing the same body was not something a completely sane person would like. In Itadori's eyes, Sukuna was nothing more than a tool that, over time, would provide him with enough power to comfortably sit at the top along with the strongest. He had no intention of letting him take control or making him an ally. He just wanted to collect all his fingers and find a way to assimilate all his power and curse technique. If he could, he wouldn't hesitate to find a way to destroy Sukuna's soul. But if that wasn't possible, he wouldn't mind keeping Sukuna trapped until his death. He didn't like this choice of words, but at the moment, it was the best he could think of. Sukuna was his stepping stone. Gathered in a forest near the reformatory where the cursed womb had emerged, Itadori watched the building from a distance with a glint in his eyes. He could see the powerful cursed energy emanating from every corner of the reformatory but noticed a greater concentration in what could be either the gymnasium or the school's swimming pool. He understood that this was likely where the special grade curse was. If possible, he wanted to increase Megumi and Nobara's caution about it, or everything would repeat itself in the end. Ijichi Kayotaka, the assistant director of Jujutsu High, made sure to relay the collected details and briefly explain the curse grades. Itadori already knew all of this and didn't worry much about his explanation, focusing more on devising a way to confront the powerful curse they would eventually face. Moving to the reformatory entrance, the group stopped in front of the door to listen to Ijichi's final words before departing. That which frightens more than the darkness, is darker than black. Purify this impurity. Walking along the outer corridors, Itadori looked up to see a black curtain emerge, covering the entire reformatory territory. This is interesting, though it doesn't serve much purpose other than hiding this kind of problem from non-sorcerers. Divine dogs. Making a sign with his hands, a shadow emerged from Megumi's back, a figure forming from the darkness to reveal a large white wolf. He will alert us when something dangerous approaches. Itadori and Nobara nodded in confirmation, the group reaching the door leading inside the reformatory and entering at once. Let's go. Entering the building, the group was surprised when a chaotic vision of pipes and buildings appeared before their eyes. This made them all go on full alert. I read about this. Itadori, who observed the surroundings attentively, immediately turned to see the entrance door disappear after something distorted the space in front of him, being replaced by an infinity of pipes. You read that book? Megumi, seeing that the door had disappeared, frowned in concern. The one Sensei Gojo gave you? Nodding in agreement, Itadori swallowed hard. Even knowing what would happen, he couldn't help but feel nervous. If his idea didn't work, the chance of ending up dead or giving control to Sukuna was high. An expansion of his innate domain. I read that only powerful and experienced sorcerers can do it, so I believe the curse did it involuntarily. Megumi agreed, his head turning to the darkness of a corridor. Was there anything else in that book? Itadori scratched his chin, looking thoughtful for a moment. Regarding innate domains, no. Just that they could be expanded, nothing too deep or technical. Hey. Why do you two seem so calm? The door disappeared. Nobara, who seemed the only one nervous about the situation, asked with worry on her face, making Megumi and Itadori turn to her. My divine dog remembers the scent of the exit. Good dog. Such a lovely dog. Nobara, who seemed to change her attitude in the blink of an eye, moved to pet the wolf. Anyway, we should move. The last thing we should do is stay in the same place for too long. Ignoring Nobara's silly attitude, Itadori took the lead. He disliked such behavior, but in that situation, knowing the danger he was in, he couldn't be as relaxed as he wanted. Damn. You just got your powers, and you're already acting like an expert. Nobara commented with a bit of irritation in her brows. Itadori didn't respond immediately, focusing on the path. Actually, I'm nervous. As the three walked, Megumi observed Itadori's attitude with an indifferent expression. Since Sukuna had taken control, Itadori acted seriously most of the time. Even his expression had changed, and Megumi could no longer see that ignorant glint in his eyes. It's as if the awareness of his execution had completely changed him. With his eyes turning to the ground, Megumi let out a quick sigh. But in the end, that's good. It means his mentality is strong enough to survive in this world. Sensei Gojo has high expectations for him, and honestly, I do too. He seems to be hardworking enough, even asking for books to study cursed energy. As Itadori walked at a normal but cautious pace, Megumi looked at his back. I know it's only a matter of time until he can learn energy manipulation. As the three opened a door that led directly to the reformatory's swimming area, the group immediately noticed some deformed bodies inside the empty pool. Damn, this is crap. Jumping into the pool, the three walked until they were in front of the bodies. Itadori had been through a lot in his former life, but seeing bodies in such mutilated states was not something he had witnessed before. Killing curses was a different thing. He saw most of them as irrational creatures intending to harm anything in front of their eyes. But regarding humans, the situation was different. It would be a lie to say he didn't feel a bit shaken by such a sight. Moving to stand in front of what remained of the best preserved body, Itadori grabbed the name tag on his uniform and tore it off, putting it in his pocket. He hadn't cared much for the woman looking for her son, but he could still hear her say his name. This was like a promise made to himself at that moment. If he could get out of that place alive, then he would personally deliver it to that woman. Megumi, keep the wolf close to you. As Itadori stood up, he couldn't help but notice when an energy signature appeared near them, his eyes immediately fixing on Nobara while he awaited the beginning of everything. I believe this is the place where the special grade curse is keeping its prey. Nobara, who seemed distracted by Itadori's attitude toward the body of that woman's son, murmured in confusion when she felt the ground under her feet soften, her body sinking before she could try to escape. Kujisaki. Megumi quickly noticed, but he wasn't fast enough to reach her. Fortunately, Itadori had been waiting for this all along, his body passing by Megumi and reaching Nobara before her legs sank completely, grabbing her arm and throwing her away from that dark shadow that suddenly appeared. Fushiguro, fall back. With Itadori's shout, Megumi immediately retreated with a jump when the special grade curse suddenly appeared in front of him, the divine wolf immediately advancing towards it to attack, only to be repelled by a slap. Damn! Trying to defeat this creature with this power gap. Landing next to a confused Nobara, Itadori drew his blade as he positioned himself. Coming to this world must have really driven me crazy. Jumping back as a burst of cursed energy exploded in front of him, Itadori was caught off guard when the special grade curse suddenly appeared beside him. His eyes widened as he lowered his arms to block a slap that sent him flying across the pool. Boom! Itadori. Seeing his companion collide with the wall, Megumi immediately signaled with his hands, summoning a black shadow near the curse. A gigantic snake emerged, biting once, crushing the curse against the wall while trying to contain it. Kujisaki. We need to get Itadori and escape as quickly as possible. Nobara, witnessing the chaotic situation unfold so suddenly, frowned at Megumi's words, her teeth clenching as she started running toward Itadori. What a shitty situation. Just as she was about to reach the spot where Itadori had been thrown, Nobara's eyes widened as a presence appeared beside her. She turned her head to find the strange curse staring at her with a huge smile. Dodge, Kujisaki. Megumi tried to summon another Shikigami, but his hands weren't faster than the curse's attack, which slapped Nobara's face. Boom! With the attack about to hit her, the curse was taken by surprise when its face was suddenly struck by a fist and its body pushed back a few meters as its smile disappeared. Damn! I blacked out for a few seconds after that slap. Standing in front of Nobara, a wounded Itadori had blood streaming from his forehead, an irritated smile on his lips as he raised his fists. Megumi, Kujisaki. Calling his two companions, Itadori quickly crouched and picked up the blade that had fallen from his hands, a vein appearing on his forehead as his face filled with irritation. Let's kill this curse. Throwing a rock at the curse, Itadori rolled to escape a burst of cursed energy, immediately getting up and running toward Megumi, who had just summoned a black wolf. We need to escape. We're facing a special grade curse. Nobara, who was keeping her distance, tried to hit the curse with her nails, but they were deflected with mere slaps. To escape, one of us needs to stay behind, and that means certain death. Itadori said while picking up another rock from the ground, using his physical prowess to hurl it at extreme speed toward the curse. We can win, I'm sure of it. We just need to work together. Seeing the curse destroy the rock with a slap, Itadori frowned as he prepared. Kujisaki needs to keep her distance and take any opportunity to attack with her nails. Your Shikigami will be of great help, Megumi. I'm sure if you weren't here, we'd already be dead by now. Eyes widening as the curse's cheeks puffed up, Itadori and Megumi jumped away, narrowly escaping what was about to be pure cursed power. I'm by far the most physically proficient here. I need any distraction to get close and attack with my knife. Sweat trickled down Megumi's forehead, his face full of indecision as they watched the curse, which was laughing at them as if they were mere toys. He's underestimating us. We'll have a chance if we attack with everything we've got. Megumi, fully understanding the situation they were in, swallowed hard as he positioned himself, his teeth clenched as he made a sign with his hands. Damn it. Fine. Summoning the enormous serpent once more, which, though injured, was still alive, Megumi ordered it to attack the curse. The Shikigami appeared from the enemy's back and bit it again. Now, Kujisaki. Nobara, hearing the signal, immediately struck some nails imbued with cursed energy with her hammer, sending them toward the curse. But as Megumi prepared to dismiss the serpent, his eyes widened when the enormous Shikigami's mouth was opened all at once, blood gushing from its lips as the curse revealed itself completely. What was that? A barrier? The nails, hitting the curse's head, ricocheted away, demonstrating its terrifying durability. Son of a bitch, Nobara cursed. The curse, with a huge smile on its lips, turned toward Nobara, a laugh escaping its throat as it prepared to advance toward her. Kujisaki, run. Megumi warned her, but Nobara already knew what to do the moment the curse stared at her, nervous sweat running down her neck as she began to run away. But her speed couldn't compare to the curse's, which reached her in an instant. Realizing she would be hit, the woman turned and raised her arms to defend herself. But to her relief, the white wolf, which had been hit by the curse, suddenly leaped off the curse's back and bit it directly on the neck, distracting the curse enough for Nobara to pull away. Thanks, puppy. The curse, seeing that Shikigami as just an annoyance, grabbed it by the neck and crushed it to the ground, its smile never leaving its lips. I've got you. But while the curse seemed distracted by killing the wolf, Itadori suddenly appeared above it, his teeth clenched as he descended, slicing. Crack. But to everyone's surprise except Itadori's, the blade not only failed to inflict any damage on the curse's skin but also shattered into several pieces. I knew this would happen. Turning to the curse, Itadori saw it rise with a commanding presence, its smile widening. I was foolish to think otherwise. Boom. Thrown back by a barrier that exploded from the curse's body, Itadori hit the ground with enough force to crack it. Itadori. Megumi and Nobara approached, Itadori spitting a mouthful of blood as he sat, his expression dark as he rested his arm on his knee. Run, I'll give control to Sukuna when you're safe. He wanted to do things differently, but it was obvious that even together, they didn't have enough power to fight a curse of this level. The best thing to do was to let Sukuna take control and try to resolve things from there. Fighting this curse would only lead to Megumi and Nobara's deaths, as even if he were in danger, he could always hand control to Sukuna, and he didn't want that. For now, it was the best course of action. What? What are you saying? We're not leaving you behind. Even though Nobara wasn't the friendliest member of the group, she wasn't someone to abandon a companion, so it was natural for her to be against the idea. You understand, don't you? Addressing Megumi, Itadori stood up, wiping the blood from his lips. This is the best thing to do right now. Megumi bit his lips. He didn't want to abandon Itadori, but he knew that with Sukuna, it was unlikely Yuji would die. In the end, he didn't have enough power to change the situation, and for now, there was nothing he could do about it. The most he could do was survive and become strong enough in the future so that this wouldn't happen again. Let's go, Kujisaki. The faster we go, the better the chances for Itadori. Nobara was silent for a moment but soon nodded reluctantly. She understood the gravity of the situation, and even if she didn't agree, she had to accept the facts. "Survive, you idiot." As the two turned and began to run, Nobara shouted to Itadori one last time. Seeing them move away, Itadori turned to the curse, which watched them with its eyes as if considering what to do. But Itadori didn't give it time to think as he closed the distance between them. "Focus here, dickhead." Striking the curse with a precise punch, Itadori immediately jumped and kicked with both feet, pushing it back. But his attacks were clearly ineffective, the curse smiling as it hit him with a punch coated in cursed energy. Boom! Itadori flew and slammed into a wall, his body collapsing to the ground as he couldn't hold back the vomit of blood. "This hurts like hell." Struggling to get up, Itadori wiped his lips, his face filled with exhaustion as he slowly brought his hands together in front of his abdomen. "To be honest, even in this situation, I'm not afraid." With his breathing slowly returning to normal, Itadori looked at the curse with caution. "Being on the brink of death like this doesn't really make me feel the fear I should be feeling." Placing his fists at his sides, Itadori took a deep breath, his eyes filling with fiery determination. "In fact, it's even making me happy." The curse, which had been looking at the young sorcerer with a contemptuous laugh, suddenly fell silent as a strong surge of cursed energy erupted from the boy, its smile disappearing completely. "Because it made me find something I've been searching for a while." Itadori, with his body emitting cursed energy uncontrollably, smiled as he placed his fist in front of his face, the cursed energy concentrating mainly in his hands. "I have to thank you. Seeing you use your energy so recklessly made me understand how to do it." The curse growled in irritation, Itadori laughing at it before his expression hardened. "Anyway, let's continue." Itadori had no time to savor his achievement of being able to manipulate cursed energy. There was a world of difference between sensing cursed energy and being able to use it in battle. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have been able to learn to manipulate it so quickly, but he was in a desperate situation where he had little choice but to keep trying until he succeeded. Fortunately, understanding how to manipulate it came to him more simply than expected. It was still incomplete, and its flow was volatile. He felt like he was wasting too much cursed energy, but for what he was about to do, he hoped it would be enough. Defeating a special grade curse was far beyond his current abilities, even though he could now enhance his attacks. He just needed to survive long enough. Boom! Jumping back to escape a blast of pure power, Itadori gritted his teeth as he raised his defense to block a barrier that extended until it hit him. With the boy being thrown away, the curse immediately advanced towards him, its claws reaching for Itadori's stomach with the intent to pierce it. But anticipating this, Itadori quickly spun his body and kicked, striking the curse's neck and sending it flying away. "This curse is too strong." Landing on the ground, he wiped the blood from his lips, the cursed energy flickering around his fists as he watched the curse rise with minimal damage. "But it continues to underestimate me." Rolling to the side to narrowly escape an advance, Itadori quickly turned and counterattacked with a punch, his fist hitting the curse's torso squarely. But despite making the creature's body tremble for a moment, it seemed to cause no significant damage, the curse smiling as it struck him with a punch coated in cursed energy. Colliding with a wall, Itadori spat a bit of blood as he landed firmly on the ground, his breathing becoming labored from the accumulated damage. "Damn! My punch didn't even cause damage." Placing a hand over his ribs, Itadori growled as a shock of pain surged through his body. "Broken ribs. That's great." Turning his gaze back to the curse, Yuji clearly saw a disdainful smile on its face, his brow furrowing as he returned to his fighting stance. "It seems I'll have to do something I've been avoiding for a while." Jumping back as the curse spat a projectile of pure cursed energy at him, Itadori growled as a bolt of pain from his ribs made him freeze. And that brief moment of hesitation due to pain was more than enough for the curse to reach him in an instant, hitting him with a powerful swipe coated in cursed energy. Boom! Scraping his back on the ground, Itadori dug his fingers into the dirt to stop his momentum. "Hey, Sukuna. Struggling to stand, Itadori prepared himself as the curse threatened to advance once more. "Help me with this. You don't want to die, do you?" "I refuse." With a new mouth appearing on Itadori's cheek, Sukuna simply declared as the boy backed away to escape an explosion of energy. "So much for avoiding me, and now you're here, asking for my help. How pathetic." Having his arm pierced by the curse's claws, Itadori gritted his teeth as he grabbed the creature's wrist and threw it away. "Well, extreme situations require extreme decisions," Yuji commented with irritation. Gripping the wound on his arm, Itadori gritted his teeth as he saw the curse land calmly on the ground. "Anyway, my soul is split into 18 more parts, so even if you die here, I can still come back." Itadori frowned at that, a sigh escaping his lips. "And you're really going to risk losing 2 parts of your soul? After all, after this, you'll never be complete again." Itadori gave a disdainful smile, his eyes fixed on the curse, which began to walk calmly towards him. "How about this, Sukuna?" Retreating quickly, Itadori used the pillars around him to hide from the curse in order to buy as much time as possible. "I'll eat all your fingers, and when that happens, how about we find out which one of us will prevail?" Jumping to the side as the curse swiped one of its claws at the pillar, Itadori quickly moved to another. "Will it be me who dominates you, or will it be you who takes control?" Widening his eyes as a claw grazed his cheek, Itadori nervously smiled as he kicked the pillar, his leg crashing through it and hitting the curse on the other side with enough force to push it away. "Tempting, isn't it?" Receiving no further answers, Itadori ran to another pillar, but the curse was too quick to intercept him, appearing in front of him in an instant. Howl. With the howl of a wolf echoing in the distance, Itadori gave a confident smile as the curse seemed distracted by the strange sound. "Think carefully about what I said, King of Curses." As the curse turned to Itadori, its eyes widened as it encountered a completely new presence staring back at it. "You irritating little brat. Using me like this." The King of Curses was now on the battlefield. "What do you think I am?" To Sukuna, Itadori was an interesting person. Of course, he disliked the boy simply because he was trapped in his body, but the fact that Itadori was able to be so contained was enough to pique his interest. Itadori seemed to be the perfect prison for someone like Sukuna, given that there were a few things that made him the ideal vessel. Sukuna was unable to access any of Itadori's memories or thoughts, limited to merely observing what was happening outside through his eyes. To Sukuna, it felt like being trapped in a cell, limited to observing the outside through a small window. Itadori also seemed naturally capable of preventing him from manifesting in any way, whether through thoughts or by manifesting through his mouth. It was irritating, but at the same time, quite interesting. The fact that someone could keep another's soul trapped in this way was definitely not something that should naturally be possible. Moreover, Itadori seemed quite talented, as he had been able to manipulate cursed energy in a short period of time. Sukuna could see all of this. Itadori was definitely someone who could become powerful in the future. But the idea of letting that happen left a bad taste in Sukuna's mouth. He was someone who liked to cut problems off at the root. He had no intention of letting someone like Itadori grow to that extent. The existence of Itadori irritated him simply because he was a perfect prison for him. Compared to someone like Gojo, Itadori was insignificant in terms of Sukuna's return, but the simple fact that he was able to imprison his soul made him a target Sukuna needed to eliminate or at least dominate his soul to gain full control of his body. What an irritating kid. But those were plans for the future. Sukuna had more important matters to attend to. Opening his eyes, Itadori suddenly found himself in an environment shrouded in darkness, his eyes narrowing as he looked around cautiously. So this is what it's like inside my soul. Frowning, he sighed when he found nothing but pure darkness stretching infinitely. How tedious. Sitting on the ground, Itadori clasped his hands together and took a deep breath. In the end, he had been unable to face the special grade curse without Sukuna's help. Fortunately, he wasn't like Itadori, who was too affected by the fear of death, making it difficult for him to regain control of his body. Itadori still felt his connection with Sukuna and didn't think he would have difficulty making the switch. In fact, he was even surprised by how easily he could do it. This led to a question that Itadori periodically took time to think about. What had really happened to the soul of the original Itadori? Mark, now Itadori, had some theories about this, but they were all based on his own assumptions. The first was that he and Itadori had had their souls fused, which somehow would end up strengthening them when combined into one. This would be a great answer to why he could contain Sukuna so much more effectively, since unlike the original Itadori, he could not only contain Sukuna's manifestations but also switch at will. This had some counterpoints, as aside from the memories of the original Itadori, he had nothing else to prove this, as he felt more like Mark than Itadori, despite having his disposition affected by the kind-hearted Itadori's memories. The second was that his own soul had swallowed Itadori's soul, which would ultimately result in the same outcome as the first theory. The third was that the original Itadori's soul had been completely replaced, leaving only his body and memories behind. Mark did not believe this theory to be true, simply because he didn't believe his soul alone could contain Sukuna better than Itadori, who had been created with this purpose in mind. Moreover, it would go against the logic of that world, where soul was body and body was soul. Itadori scratched his chin, his mind brushing away those thoughts as Sukuna began his fight against the special grade curse. I guess I can think about this later. For now, I should focus on absorbing as much as possible from this fight. With the special grade curse finally defeated, Sukuna turned calmly as he walked away, his gaze hardening as he stopped for a moment. Hey, kid. If you're going to switch, hurry up. Little shit? Receiving no response, Sukuna broke into a huge, devilish grin, his body turning to leave. But before he could move, a strange sensation coursed through his body, his smile disappearing completely. I tricked you. With the marks disappearing from his face, and his second pair of eyes closing completely, Itadori resumed control of his body, to Sukuna's irritation. You really thought I wouldn't come back? How naive. With a mocking smile, Itadori began walking towards the exit of the dormitory. You piece of shit. With a second mouth opening on Itadori's cheek, Sukuna spoke in an irritated tone, which drew a smile from Yuji. I'll relish killing your friends when. Slap. Shoo. I want to enjoy my freedom. Silencing him with a slap, Itadori continued on his way with a satisfied smile on his lips. The only reason I paid so much attention to this fight was to observe the use of reverse cursed energy. Rubbing his chin, Itadori frowned. And seeing Sukuna use it, I was able to understand. I was able to understand that I didn't understand anything. It's good to see you're okay. Outside the dormitory, Megumi found Itadori walking calmly through the forest. Controlling Sukuna has been quite simple. Stopping in front of his companion, Itadori sighed as he pulled one of Sukuna's fingers from his pocket. That curse seemed to have swallowed this. That's why it was so powerful. Megumi frowned and, placing his hand on his chin, nodded in agreement. I understand now, but how did a Sukuna's finger end up in that place? Itadori shrugged in response. He knew Kenjaku had placed it there, but it would be strange to reveal that suddenly. By the way, where's Kujisaki? Looking around, Itadori asked when he didn't find any sign of the girl. She returned to the school first. We faced some curses when we were escaping, and her arm was injured. Megumi replied, turning to walk. Itadori nodded, accompanying him as they walked away from that place. On their way out of the dormitory, Yuji eliminated some remaining curses and took some time to think about what to do from that point on. Preventing the deal with Sukuna was indeed important and would prevent many problems in the future, but in doing so, he missed out on some opportunities. Would he still be trained directly by Gojo? After all, that was an opportunity he didn't want to miss. Since he was already able to use cursed energy, he just needed to refine his control, and receiving tutoring from Gojo himself would certainly help with that. He didn't have a technique, which meant his strength depended solely on his control over cursed energy. Compared to the others, he had this significant disadvantage. Raising Sukuna's finger to his eyes, Itadori analyzed it in silence, Megumi seeing this and raising an eyebrow. "What are you going to do with bite?" Widening his eyes as Itadori suddenly threw the finger into his mouth, Megumi felt sweat accumulate on his forehead, the hairs on his neck standing up as a massive amount of cursed energy exploded from his companion's body. Ugh. I'll never get used to this. But just as the energy emerged, it disappeared, causing Megumi to sigh in relief. As they distanced themselves from the forest, Itadori opened a small smile as he looked at his hand. "I can feel it. My amount of cursed energy has certainly increased." Even though at the moment, he didn't have any technique to rely on, he felt it would only be a matter of time until his body assimilated Sukuna's techniques. He could feel his connection with the King of Curses growing stronger, even if just slightly. He knew the best way to acquire his techniques was by eating his fingers to accelerate the assimilation. Itadori was not a simple vessel, nor a mere prison. He was a devourer, a creature capable of stealing the techniques of any being he devoured. A talent not seen in 1,000 years. "I feel this disadvantage won't last long. You seem to have handled the situation at the dormitory well, and even got a little stronger." Gojo smiled as he looked at Itadori. From his arrival, he could immediately notice his growth. In terms of talent, he could even say that Itadori was on par with Yuta, perhaps even better, since Itadori had been able to manipulate his cursed energy in less than 2 weeks. Gojo certainly hadn't been wrong when he said he was a true talent not seen in 1,000 years. But in the end, I still had to use Sukuna to get out alive. Itadori sighed, sitting on the sofa in the room they were in while looking around curiously. "By the way, why are we here? I thought we would go back to the school dormitories." Itadori recognized that room as the same place used for training Itadori in the original story, which made him internally excited. "Plans have changed. It seems the higher-ups aren't very happy with the fact that you're still alive, so you'll stay here until you become strong enough." Itadori nodded. He knew that, since he hadn't died as expected, he would surely be hunted later. With his precarious level of cursed energy manipulation, he wasn't confident he could survive without Gojo's presence nearby. Certainly, secret training was the best course of action for now. "You already seem to understand cursed energy manipulation, so we'll focus on refining your control." Gojo opened a small smile, Itadori raising an eyebrow in confusion when the man suddenly pulled out a small boxing bear from his back. "Where did he get that from?" "Since you can already emit cursed energy, your training will be a bit different from what I had planned. I want you to do the same as you did when fighting that special grade curse." Itadori listened to Gojo's words attentively, his eyes turning to his hands as he recalled the feeling of that battle. And in silence, a small smile appeared on his lips as he succeeded, the cursed energy being expelled from his body until it slowly concentrated in his fists. But as he felt excited for succeeding, his eyes widened when a fist suddenly landed in his stomach, his head turning down to see that cursed puppet ready to attack him again. "You little shit." With a vein popping on his forehead, Itadori tried to punch it, but the puppet quickly dodged and counterattacked with a precise hook. "It's set to attack the moment you exceed a certain limit of cursed energy, so you'll need to reduce the output until it goes back to sleep. Of course, it will gradually lower the limit." "Huh?" Blinking, Itadori immediately focused on reducing the amount of cursed energy, which made the puppet immediately return to sleep. "This seems too easy, maybe the biggest challenge will be the exhaustion." "You think it's easy? Well, then I'll raise the level a bit." Going to a table, Gojo picked up numerous boxes of movie CDs, a smile on his lips. "You'll do all this while watching all these movies, and continue until you achieve decent control of your energy." "Okay, that complicates things a bit. Boom. You damned puppet. Mastering his own cursed energy output was simpler than expected. Itadori, demonstrating his level of learning, only needed a day and a half to do this and was already able to control his cursed energy. Although he wasn't that skilled yet, it was enough to keep him out of trouble, and with his increased power since devouring Sukuna's third finger, he felt he could beat the boarding school's special grade curse. Unlike the original Itadori, he had no problem making his cursed energy accompany his superhuman body, which caused him to miss out on an interesting technique that could be useful to him later. Divergent Fist. He could try to learn how to use it later, but for now, he didn't see much point in this technique. The best thing to do at the moment was to refine his control even more, so that in the future, the effectiveness of this technique would increase by at least 300%. What's more, Itadori was very tempted to learn how to imbue cursed energy into weapons. He had liked the knife he used against the cursed belly, but unfortunately, it had been destroyed during the clash. If possible, he would like to get another knife. This would increase his arsenal and power in battle. Being limited to just his fists was not something he wanted, especially considering that he would be facing opponents with innate techniques in the future. Boom! Punching the cursed doll when it tried to attack him, Itadori sent it into the wall. Since he already had decent control over his cursed energy, he decided to use the cursed doll as a means of combat training. His agility made him the perfect target for reflex training. Although punching the doll the instant it appeared in front of him, Itadori once again sent it flying away. His agility was no longer enough for someone like Itadori. Yuji. Jumping when a voice came from his back, Itadori immediately turned and attacked, his fist colliding with a palm that stopped his punch with frightening ease. You seem to have improved very quickly. Blinking, Itadori looked up to see Gojo with a small smile on his lips. Ah, Gojo-sensei. It's you. Retracting his fist, Itadori rubbed it. Damn, even though I imbued my fist with cursed energy, it still hurt. What a monster. We're leaving now. Itadori blinked, his mind immediately going to Gojo's fight against Jogo. Okay. Domain expansion. Itadori already knew about this. After all, it was something that could be considered the pinnacle of a jujitsu sorcerer. What's more, he had already seen Sukuna use his expansion firsthand, so he wasn't too surprised to see Jogo use it too. But he couldn't help admitting that the curse was too strong. Even if for someone like Gojo it wasn't much, the current Itadori couldn't see himself lasting more than 10 seconds against someone like him. But while Jogo's expansion of dominance was frightening, Gojo's expansion was oppressive and frightening. Itadori wouldn't have been able to understand it if it hadn't been for the fact that he followed the anime. It was definitely a difficult level to reach. Who sent you here? Blinking at Jogo's head, Gojo questioned with authority. This is no time to be amazed. But while Gojo was busy interrogating the curse, Itadori frowned as he spread cursed energy through his body, enhancing it as much as possible. If we can exorcise the Jogo here and now, it will save us a lot of trouble later. I can't let Hanami save him. Going on alert when a projectile flew towards him, Gojo jumped backwards to escape, the Jogo head sliding away until it stopped next to Yuji. Itadori, waiting for the attack, unlike Gojo, was not distracted when a sea of petals sprang up all over the place, his attention completely on the head of the curse. And while waiting for Hanami to arrive, Itadori immediately noticed the approach of nature's protective curse. I've got you. Clenching his teeth and thrusting his body forward, Itadori proved quick enough to reach Jogo's head first, kicking it away and surprising Hanami, who simply ignored the boy and tried to retrieve his head. Not so fast. But unwilling to let that happen, Itadori came up behind her with a dangerous smile, his fist coming down on her back with enough force to push her to the ground. Boom! Crushing the curse, Itadori blinked when the curse was out of sight, the hairs on the back of his neck rising and causing him to throw himself backwards to escape the roots that sprang up from the ground, threatening to impale him. Shit. Cursing in his mind, he tried to look around, but Hanami's presence had already disappeared completely. Too fast. Interesting. Gojo, walking over to stand beside him, rubbed his own chin thoughtfully. You did well to try and stop the curse, Yuji. I swore I got it right. Itadori frowned in disappointment. And you got it right, but the curse sank your own body into the ground. That's how she escaped. Itadori sighed, praising Hanami's cunning in his mind. Well, since you saw that, I want you to become strong enough to defeat those two. Itadori blinked and pointed to himself, Gojo nodding in agreement with a small smile. Don't worry. To speed up your progress, let's move on to the next step in your training. Combat training. A whole month had passed since Itadori's encounter with the two special grade curses. And during that short time, Itadori hadn't interrupted his training for a single day. And because of that, his progress had been too gigantic. At this point, Itadori was already many steps away from its canonical version. Gojo could see his growth and could praise him for it. Itadori had improved to the point where he was completely different from the version he was a month ago. A genius, as Gojo himself liked to praise him. Are you ready? Next to Nanami, Itadori kept a hunting knife in a sheath at his waist, a small smile appearing on his lips as he nodded determinedly. The last month had passed quickly. Busy with his training and his studies of the Jujutsu world, Itadori barely saw the days go by. Fortunately, all his efforts turned out not to be in vain when he saw a significant improvement in himself. His control over his own cursed energy had improved to the point where he no longer needed to worry about its expenditure in a fight, and thanks to combat training with Gojo himself, he felt confident of defeating most curses with minimal expenditure of cursed energy. As well as refining his control, he had learned some useful tricks, such as imbuing cursed energy into melee weapons, although he couldn't say that he had mastered this technique. He was able to do it, but his control when imbuing something was chaotic, which made it unfeasible for prolonged fights. He knew he had improved, at least much more than the original Yuji, but he still had a long way to go. At least he felt confident about facing Mahito. If he and Nanami faced him together, they could definitely put an end to the curse. Mahito's death was essential, since the curse had truly frightening potential. Although Itadori found it a little annoying to be unable to extract anything from him before killing him, he wouldn't think twice about doing so. In addition to the victims, there was another boy, but it's unlikely that he's the culprit. Climbing the stairs to the terrace, Nanami adjusted the glasses on his face, Itadori listening with a doubtful expression. I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't think it's the work of a shaman either. Arriving at the terrace, the two wizards immediately went on alert as two curses awaited them at the top. Bento. The creature growled, and Nanami immediately drew his blunt blade. I'll deal with that one. Declaring with little interest, Nanami stepped forward while giving Yuji one last look. If you have any problems, call me. But ignoring his words, Itadori just shrugged with a sigh, his attention turning to the second curse that was threatening to advance towards him. Problem? Pulling out his knife, a thin layer of cursed energy covered his blade, a cut splitting the curse in half before it could even move to escape. That's a bit insulting. You move well for someone your age. Blinking as the sound of something breaking rang out across the terrace, Itadori turned to see Nanami staring at him with the curse already dead right behind him. It's impressive. Itadori rolled his eyes with a small smile, and putting the knife away, he moved to Nanami's side. Killing people, for Itadori, was still a dark path in his eyes. He hadn't done it in his old life, and now it was a very uncomfortable idea. The fact that he was so comfortable with the idea of killing curses was due to the fact that they were curses. Even among the sentient curses, there were very few of them who didn't want to harm humans. But the subject was still a little different when it came to humans. Like anyone outraged by the state of the world, he could still wish for the death of a rapist or serial killer and even get his hands dirty if he had the chance. But what when it wasn't a case like that? What if someone was suffering enough that only death could free them? Was Itadori able to free them from their torment without feeling dejected afterwards? To be honest, no. Even without the memories of Itadori, Mark was a morally good person, someone capable of feeling resentment towards others. So being forced to kill those humans transfigured by Mahito still made him very angry about the curse. Most of them were completely ordinary people. It wasn't as if they were convicted criminals. But as much as he felt bad for them, he didn't hesitate to kill them to put them out of their misery. Itadori liked to believe that he could be indifferent to other people's situations, but that was a lie. He certainly didn't see himself as a hero, but he wouldn't hesitate to help someone in trouble. Perhaps, in the end, the main difference between him and Itadori was maturity. "You look thoughtful, Itadori." Sitting on the sofa in the living room, Nanami suddenly commented when he noticed Itadori in silence. He knew that the idea of killing humans, however much they had become monsters, was a delicate subject for someone so young. Itadori, putting his own thoughts aside, just sighed as he turned to Nanami. "I was just wondering what we should do about all this." Nanami blinked, curious about the boy's answer. "And what do you think we should do?" Itadori gave a small smile and stood up, turning to Nanami. "I think we should kill the person responsible for all this as soon as possible." Nanami smiled. Junpei. Until a few hours ago, he had completely forgotten about its existence. And as the original Itadori, he would also have to deal with the boy. To be honest, Itadori felt bad for the boy. Surely, he would be able to change his mother's fate, as long as he took the opportunity to get Sukuna's finger back. But as for Junpei's fate, that would depend solely on the boy. If he decided to continue trusting Mahito, Itadori wouldn't think twice about capturing him. He wouldn't allow Mahito to transfigure him. After all, Itadori wouldn't wish that on even his worst enemy, but he wouldn't hesitate to take him down if necessary. Walking through the residential area, Itadori soon spotted Junpei together with an overweight man. He vaguely remembered the conversation between the boy and what was supposed to be his teacher and immediately moved when Junpei threatened to attack. "Hey!" Appearing behind the teacher, Junpei was surprised by the presence of the new figure, the teacher turning to see the person responsible for interrupting him. "What? But before the teacher could question him, Itadori's hand landed on his head, the man being dragged away at high speed by his skull. "Help!" He tried to shout for help, but Itadori was too fast for anyone to do anything. Junpei blinked in confusion, but before he could think about what had just happened, he was surprised again when Itadori came walking towards him. "That's fast. Sorry about that, that idiot would get in the way." Itadori stopped in front of Junpei. But why did you do that?" Clearly confused, the boy asked. "I just needed to talk to you. How about we go somewhere else? From the look on your face earlier, I'm sure you don't want to see that man again." Talking to Junpei was easier than expected. Itadori had expected to have some difficulty due to the difference in age, at least mentally, between the two, but Junpei was quite intelligent for someone of his age and knew how to hold a good conversation on a variety of subjects. Itadori would be lying if he said he didn't like the boy, and that would only make things more difficult if he fell for the curses later on. Fortunately, Junpei was still a good boy who loved his mother above all else. As long as he could save her, Itadori was confident that he would be able to prevent her downfall. That's why he turned down the invitation from the beautiful woman who was the boy's mother and decided to follow them cautiously to their house. He didn't need to cause any fights or get involved with the person responsible for putting Sukuna's finger in that place. He just needed to pick up the cursed object quickly enough so that no curse would be attracted to the house. After that, a simple conversation with Junpei would possibly get him out of all the trouble that was the Jujutsu world. It was with this in mind that, at that moment, he watched the apartment from afar, waiting for any ripple of cursed energy to occur. Recovering the finger was not only crucial at that moment to save Junpei's mother but also for his own purpose. Itadori felt his bond with Sukuna growing stronger and stronger, and he was confident that devouring another finger would be just what he needed to start assimilating some of his cursed technique. And fortunately, Itadori didn't have to wait long. A ripple of cursed energy suddenly began to explode from the residence, a signal that immediately made him move. No second should be wasted. Curses were inconsistent, and they could attack immediately or wait a while. But that changed when there was an object that emitted so much cursed energy. This caused them to become extremely aggressive, whether with humans or even other curses. They would do anything to get Sukuna's finger. But Itadori wasn't afraid of failing even once. As long as it wasn't a curse of a special degree, he had the confidence to exorcise it without too much trouble. Leaping to the roof of the house, Itadori was quick to open a passage, landing in what must have been the kitchen, only to see his finger placed on the table. Found it. Grabbing his finger, he quickly devoured it. At that point, he no longer hesitated to do so as before. Of course, that didn't change the fact that the sensation of the finger going down his throat was disgusting. Feeling the cursed energy explode from his body, Itadori gave a small smile before returning to normal, his eyes turning to his hand as he squeezed his fingers. My cursed energy has increased even more. Incredible. But as he contemplated the sudden increase in his cursed energy, he didn't consider something extremely important in that situation. He hadn't considered that other curses might have taken a while to arrive on the scene. Receiving a full attack on the side of his body, Itadori was surprised as he was pushed backwards. A curse? Pulling himself together, his attention turned to the curse that had suddenly appeared, a strange humanoid figure that had some excess skin all over its body. Ew, that's weird. Itadori clucked his tongue in disgust, and without much thought, he lunged forward, his fist hitting the curse squarely and piercing it with ease. These things get stranger and stranger. As he stared at the lifeless curse, his eyes narrowed as a strange sensation ran through his body, his eyes blinking a few times before he turned to see Junpei standing in the hallway. Oh. Unable to think of anything, he simply waved at the boy. Hi, Junpei. The boy didn't answer immediately, just swallowed. Itadori rubbed the back of his neck when he saw this, his eyes alternating between the curse and Junpei a few times before he focused completely on the boy. How about we talk about it? In the end, the conversation with Junpei had been more peaceful than expected. The boy quickly understood that if it hadn't been for Itadori, his mother would most likely be dead, and he could only be grateful for that. Itadori also made it clear that getting involved with clever curses was not a good idea. Junpei had seen it with his own eyes. Even if they were apparently good-natured, they were still curses, and they wouldn't mind betraying him if it led to their own goals. Junpei, as an easily manipulated boy, believed Mahito and almost paid the price for it. He could understand that very well. And saying goodbye, Junpei thanked Yuji one last time before returning to his home. Itadori, who at this point was already on his way to the hideout where he was being held by Gojo, was able to crack a smile. He had no obligation to save the boy, after all, having done so left him completely in the dark as to Mahito's next location. Perhaps he would still attack the school, but that was no longer information that Itadori could trust. He had saved Junpei because he felt he could, and so he did. The boy was a good person and didn't deserve to lose his mother just to maintain the canon. Itadori wouldn't sacrifice someone just for the sake of it. At least, he didn't expect to have to do it in the future. Sigh. Sighing, the boy turned to the starry sky. The stars that he had once been at least a little close to, shining at an infinite distance, which even in his old life he could only dream of reaching. After a while, he couldn't help feeling nostalgic for his old life. Becoming an astronaut had been the greatest achievement of his life, a dream that he had used everything in his power to achieve. Having it taken away from him still. It left a bad taste in his mouth. But he didn't dislike this new life. Being able to save people was also rewarding. He believed that becoming an astronaut meant sacrificing himself for the evolution of humanity. In the end, he was still sacrificing himself for people. And he didn't feel indignant about it, or anything like that. In fact, he felt fulfilled. He had his own selfishness, his own desire to get stronger, but he wasn't like Sukuna, who believed he could do whatever he wanted because he was strong. Eating when you're hungry, killing when you don't like someone. Itadori couldn't act like that. He would avoid sacrificing himself for someone at all costs, but he wouldn't hesitate to do so if it was the only option. I think Itadori affected me more than I realized. Junpei, why the hell is there a huge hole in our roof? In the distance, Itadori heard a voice that he recognized well from his old life. The voice of an angry woman. Opening his eyes as a gentle breeze hit his skin, Itadori suddenly sat up while hugging his own body, an icy gale threatening to freeze him with its ferocity. How the hell did I end up here? Standing up while shivering from the cold, Itadori was surprised when, feeling the soft ground, he turned around to find his shoes covered in what could only be snow. Hell, is this another Gojo-sensei training session? Raising his head to survey his surroundings, the boy was startled when the snowstorm prevented him from seeing more than 10 meters in front of him, his eyes turning skyward, only to be greeted by the complete vastness of the black universe, which was dimly lit by the stars. That's weird. As Itadori looked around cautiously, he couldn't help but find the whole situation strange. Gojo had never put him through anything like this before, so what was the point now? Itadori was unable to decipher his sensei's mind, but he was sure that if he were to send him to a remote and deadly place, he would at least give some sign of his intention. Besides, he's supposed to be traveling. Swinging his legs to clear the snow, Itadori raised an eyebrow when the snow seemed to slowly return to engulf his feet again. This made Itadori narrow his eyes in suspicion. This was definitely not a normal place. What the hell is going on? Unable to see very far, Itadori decided once again to turn his attention to the dark sky, the sound of the gale, accompanied by his breathing, being the only thing his ears were able to pick up. But as he watched the starry sky, his eyes widened when something caught his eye, a bright star that seemed to slowly deform before his eyes. What? What's that? While Itadori was shocked by this phenomenon, after all, it was something completely unusual. The star continued to change, slowly taking on a shape that made the hairs on the back of the boy's neck stand on end. One eye, with its menacing glare, seemed completely focused on him. That's scary. Swallowing dryly, his attention never left the strange eye that had previously been nothing more than a star. But while he seemed distracted by that sinister thing, he didn't notice when a huge figure emerged from behind him, a huge shadow covering him completely, which immediately made him shiver. Slowly turning around, Itadori felt his body freeze when he noticed two orange orbs staring at him with deadly intensity, a loud snort from a giant snout making him realize what the creature was. A bloody dire wolf. Shit. Seeing the wolf staring at him in complete silence, Itadori gave a nervous little smile. I think I cursed myself. Opening his eyes and immediately sitting up, a startled Itadori looked around frantically, his heart slowing down the instant he realized he was back in his own room. Isso. Holding his chin thoughtfully, Itadori took a deep breath as he seemed to ponder what he had just experienced. Was that my innate domain? 2 days had passed since what happened at Junpei's house. With the low-level sorcerers watching the boy's house and not reporting anything major, Itadori should feel at ease. But Itadori was far from feeling that way. He knew Mahito's personality, and he knew that the curse wouldn't give up so easily. He would definitely attack, with or without Junpei. You just had to know where and when. And that's what made Itadori increasingly anxious. Even though Nanami told him that there was no point in stressing over something he couldn't control, Itadori couldn't stop himself from feeling that way. After all, it was his fault that everything could turn out differently, whether positively or negatively. He just hoped things weren't as tragic as they were originally supposed to be. "We have a problem." And while he seemed lost in his own thoughts, Itadori was taken by surprise when Ijichi suddenly entered the room where he was, causing Nanami, who was sitting in an armchair, to turn around curiously. "A curtain has been lifted." From the looks of things, Itadori didn't have to wait long to find out what changes his actions had caused. Even when Nanami clearly told him not to move, and Ijichi tried to stop him, Itadori just shrugged and moved as fast as he could. The place Mahito chose, as convenient as it seemed, was the same school he was originally supposed to choose, the school Junpei attended. Did this mean that the boy had decided to choose Mahito's side? Itadori couldn't say for sure. The only thing he knew for sure was that he had to get there as soon as possible, or things could be worse than he expected. And so he did. Strengthening his already naturally powerful body, he soon reached the school, his eyes narrowing the instant he stepped through the curtain, only to find the purest silence. A dead silence, which made Itadori realize that the situation couldn't be further from control. And that made him move again, his eyes fixed on the gymnasium, as the cursed energy of the place seemed to concentrate mainly there. "Shit. I hope it's not too late." Opening the doors to the gymnasium, Itadori quickly entered, his eyes widening when he found countless students sprawled on the floor, all of them still breathing, but with no sign of waking up anytime soon. But while he believed that things wouldn't differ from the original story, he was surprised when he found no sign of Junpei. What does that mean? About to crouch down to monitor the vital signs of one of the students, Itadori froze when a strong pressure of cursed energy exploded from his back, causing him to immediately turn around to see a Mahito at the entrance to the gymnasium. "You took longer than expected, Mr. Host." Mahito commented with disdain in his tone, a mocking smile on his lips, which drew an angry grunt from Itadori. "You know, I hate it when someone tries to deprive me of something." Itadori flinched when Mahito stepped forward. Even though he knew that Sukuna would not allow his soul to be touched, the human curse was still a dangerous opponent. "And that's why I'm going to punish you for trying to steal my toy." Mahito smiled fearfully, which made Itadori feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Making you feel the despair of being unable to save people." Slap. Clapping his hands together, a smiling Mahito stepped back, the doors of the gymnasium closing to leave Itadori alone, along with the countless students, who suddenly began to convulse around him. What? As the bodies of each student deformed in front of his eyes, Itadori wondered in complete awe at all those children standing up to show completely distorted versions of themselves. A hellish sight for someone like Itadori, who had tried to change the fate of all of them for the better. But in the end, he had been unable to do so. So that, in reality, he made everything much worse. With the creatures surrounding him, a frozen Itadori stared at the door through which Mahito had left in silence, completely ignoring when all the transfigured students advanced towards him with the intention of attacking. Bastard! Receiving a full punch to the face, Itadori clenched his teeth tightly as blood dripped from his lips, his eyes filled with an animalistic fury that could be felt even by Mahito, who was standing a few meters away from the building. "I'm going to kill you." Hitting one of the creatures with a punch, Itadori sent it flying across the gymnasium, his murderous intent exploding from his body to the point of making even the now irrational students freeze for a second. At that point, the one in the center of that gymnasium could no longer be considered Itadori Yuji, or even Mark. His animalistic rage had made him someone completely different. He was now just a predator hunting its prey. As a door opened, sunlight streamed in to reveal an empty corridor. Otaki, an assistant manager at JujutsuGuy, entered the house cautiously, with only a flashlight in hand, which he used to illuminate where the sunlight was unable to reach. What the hell? Having to come here alone. Muttering in an annoyed manner, the man snorted as he reached the kitchen of the residence. Soon after the curtain was lifted, he was sent to Yoshino Junpei's house to check on him and his mother. Otaki thought this was unnecessary. After all, the last report was only a day old, and they seemed fine. But Ijichi, cautious as he was, wanted to make sure everything was all right, which led to Otaki being sent alone. This annoyed the man, but he didn't think much of it. After all, work was work. "Miss Yoshino? Are you there?" Lighting up the room he was in, Otaki raised an eyebrow in suspicion as he declared his presence. "I'm a community worker. I was sent because of some anonymous complaints about the strong smell of cigarettes in your home." Answered by complete silence, Otaki narrowed his eyes in suspicion. After all, no one had told him that the woman had left the house. That's strange. Walking back to the corridors that led to the bedroom, Otaki moved to the room that was supposed to belong to the woman, and without prompting, opened the door impatiently. But while he thought something was wrong, he could never have expected anything like what was before his eyes. Junpei. Otaki's face filled with dread, his mouth dropping open in complete disbelief as his eyes moved over the thing in the room. What used to be a beautiful woman close to 40 years old. Now he was just something far removed from his former self. A cluster of flesh, muttering the name of his son as if asking God to look at him one last time. "My son. Junpei." Boom. Punching the gym door, Itadori sent it flying like a bullet. His clothes, once clean, were now completely soaked with blood. His fists were dripping with red fluid, while his face was smeared with the flesh of what had once been innocent students. But while the sight of himself was quite threatening, these aspects were not what stood out most about the boy at that moment. But his eyes emitted a dangerous gleam that indicated his intentions at that moment. The same intentions of a hungry predator when hunting. The purest intention to kill. "Oh. That's quite surprising," Mahito, who was waiting by the window in one of the rooms, declared with surprise in his tone. "I didn't think you'd kill them so brutally. Maybe I'll have to change my plans." Jumping when a projectile threatened to hit him, Mahito landed deftly on the ground, his eyes turning to the window he was standing at before, only to see a hole cut in the concrete. "Boy. That was scary." Mahito smiled at the sight, turning to see Itadori staring at him with a deadly expression. "Boring. You didn't even let me finish." Mahito let his smile widen, his hands going to his pockets and pulling out what, to Itadori's eyes, looked like a strange-shaped piece of wood. But because of his meta-knowledge, he knew very well what those strange objects were. Reshaped human souls, now in Mahito's hands, were nothing more than toys for him to play with as he pleased. A sight that made Itadori frown with disgust and irritation. "You didn't even let me show you my newest creation." Throwing the small object of flesh forward, Mahito snapped his finger, his disdainful smile never disappearing from his lips. "I present to you, Yoshino Junpei. In his new form." Itadori, his eyes wide as the object deformed in front of him, clenched his fingers in his palm as the object took on a transfigured humanoid shape, the blood beginning to drip from his hand the instant he saw that the only recognizable feature of what had once been Junpei was his hair, which covered the hole where his eyes should have been. "Junpei." Itadori thought with guilt in his eyes, and biting his lip, he opened his trembling hands, his hatred growing even more when what was supposed to be Junpei collapsed face down on the ground, with no sign of life. I think he got a bit tired. Crap, maybe I changed his shape too abruptly. Well, my mistake. Boom. Mahito choked when Itadori's fist suddenly hit him full in the face, some of his teeth flying out of his mouth as blood exploded from his nose. That. Falling backwards onto the ground a few meters from his original location, Mahito immediately stood up with a surprised look on his face. "You really hurt me." But as shock filled his eyes, it didn't take long for his expression to return to its usual one. "I see. So he's able to perceive the outline of the soul." Wiping the blood from his nose, He ran his tongue over the place where one of his teeth should have been. If it can hit my soul, then I'd better avoid being hit by it. Jumping to the side as a knife flew towards him, Mahito immediately raised his defense to block a fist, his forearms being hit hard enough to make him stagger. Unexpectedly, transfiguring his arm to form a pointed drill, Mahito was unable to attack when Itadori covered the distance between the two and hit him squarely in his solar plexus, his body flying backwards until it hit the wall of the school building. I'm facing my natural enemy. Smiling, Mahito increased the size of his arm and hit the debris around him, sending it towards Itadori, who didn't seem to mind as he walked quickly towards him. I said I'm going to kill you, you son of a bitch. Itadori, seeing a piece of concrete flying towards him, simply hit back with his hand, the cursed energy exploding from his body in a way that made him even more threatening. Then stop running away. Sweeping the distance between the two, Itadori attacked with a punch, his fist smashing into the concrete, only for him to be unable to find any sign of Mahito. I've heard you before, asshole. Mahito, appearing at his back, raised his arm as he transfigured it into a blade. Now get changed soon dash. Trying to slash the boy, the curse was surprised when Itadori ducked at the last second, countering with a sharp kick to his chin. Shit. As blood gushed from his mouth, Mahito cursed in his mind, his eyes turning down to see Itadori already standing in front of him, staring at him with a deadly gaze as the cursed energy built up in his fist. This is starting to get annoying. Boom. Receiving a sharp blow to the face, Mahito was sent reeling backwards, but before he could go any further, he blinked as he felt a grip on his wrist stop him, his head turning to see Itadori staring at him. Do you think it's over? Itadori, raising his fist again, let the cursed energy accumulate once more. It's just beginning. Boom. Hit once again, Mahito had his face pressed against the ground, his head smashing into the ground. Itadori, standing imposingly over Mahito's body, watched him in complete silence, the gleam in his eye never fading. All right, that's enough. But just as he was about to start stomping on the body of the curse, Itadori's eyes widened when suddenly the ground beneath his feet shook, and Mahito's voice rang out below him. About to jump when the ground broke, Itadori wasn't quick enough when an expanse of cursed flesh grabbed him around the waist, smashing him into the ground once before leaving him suspended upside down in the air. Stop being annoying, man. Get it changed soon. Even if he was beaten, Mahito wouldn't declare it to Itadori. He still wanted to stick to his plan, even if the boy's attitude and level of power were completely different from what was expected. So, having caught him like that, he was quick to touch his chest with his palm. But he couldn't have expected such a fierce reaction from the King of Curses. So you intend to touch my soul, huh? Mahito, opening his eyes, suddenly found himself in the center of Sukuna's innate domain, the King of Curses sitting on his throne of bones. You amused me with what you did to the boy, and that's why I'll forgive you this time. But put yourself in your place, fool. Mahito, coming back to reality, blinked rapidly, sweat dripping from his forehead as he met the one who was considered the King of Curses. Hey, asshole. But while he seemed lost as to what had just happened, his attention slowly turned to Itadori, the hairs on the back of his neck immediately standing on end when he noticed the boy pointing his index finger in his direction. What does that feel like? Mahito asked himself with shock coursing through his body, his eyes never straying from Itadori. You should be more worried about me. Mahito, feeling his whole body tremble in terror, was about to throw Itadori away, but the boy was quicker with his words. Disma dash. Boom. But before Itadori could complete his words, Mahito was suddenly hit by a sharp attack on his neck, his body being sent flying away as Itadori was released. Nanami. Immediately noticing who was responsible for the attack, Itadori cracked a small smile as he stood up. I'll scold you later, now we have something more important to deal with. Itadori had failed in a way that he couldn't forgive himself for. Junpei's death, after saving his mother, was a possibility he hadn't considered. He was a fool. Because of his foolishness, not only was Junpei dead, but so were dozens of other students who had absolutely no connection to the jujitsu world. Trying to make things better only made the result much worse than it originally should have been. He felt sadness, remorse, and anger for the lives lost. He felt self-hatred. So focused on himself, he had forgotten that the world around him could still be affected by his own actions. This was no longer a simple anime world, this was now the world he lived in, and if he didn't act accordingly, people would die because of him. That was something he could see clearly now. And he would no longer ignore this fact. "Give me a situation report," Nanami asked, and Itadori, standing to the side, wiped his lips before saying it. "All the students are." Itadori was clearly uncomfortable with his next words, and Nanami was quick to notice. "Dead. I was too late." Nanami didn't respond to the information, but it was clear from his frown that it had annoyed him. "What about you?" Itadori shifted his shoulders, and clenching his fists, he quickly diagnosed himself, his brow furrowing as he raised his fists. "I'm fine, that idiot didn't land any clean hits." Mahito, emerging from the rubble into which he had been thrown, shook his head as he wiped the blood from his lips, his gaze becoming serious as he turned to the two interacting sorcerers. But Nanami, noticing the bleeding and bruises all over his face, raised an eyebrow in question, his eyes turning to stare at Itadori. "Itadori, what are those bruises?" Itadori blinked for a moment, and remembering that Mahito shouldn't be affected by attacks from ordinary sorcerers, he quickly replied. "I hit him pretty hard in the face." Rubbing his fist, Itadori gave a small, dismissive smile. "He didn't manage to do much." "Did he touch you?" "Yes, but I think Sukuna must have stopped him or something." "I see." Nanami looked thoughtful for a moment. "My attacks don't affect him, but I can stop him. We'll shower him with attacks from all directions and at that point, we'll exorcise him." Seeing the teenager nod in agreement, Nanami took his own position, the grip on the handle of his blunt sword firm as he was about to advance. Mahito, seeing the two ready to do battle, sighed in annoyance as he transformed his arm into a blade. "I need to finish off the first-degree sorcerer first, I can leave Itadori Yuji for later dash." But while he was formulating his plan, Mahito quickly jumped up to dodge a punch that smashed into the ground where he had been standing moments before. Did he get any faster? Mahito questioned in his mind, his eyes returning to Itadori to see the boy staring at him with a murderous look. Nanami, seeing the curse retreating, quickly covered the distance between them, Mahito raising his bladed arm fast enough to block an attack from his blunt sword. But just as he was about to counter the sorcerer's attack, he turned to block a fist, the attack hitting him square in the face and pushing him towards Nanami, who followed up with a clean hit from the blunt sword to his neck. Shit! About to be swallowed up by a torrent of attacks, Mahito jumped, his body deforming into a ball of flesh as countless thorns exploded in all directions. But the two sorcerers were undeterred, simply walking away while breaking the thorns that threatened to hit them, digging until they could reach the ball of meat. But as he reached him, Mahito changed shape once again, his body taking on a childlike form as he leapt away to dodge Nanami's sword, which smashed into the ground. Boom! But being hit just as Itadori seemed to be waiting for his change of form, Mahito flew away as blood flew from his mouth, his body bouncing on the ground a few times, before he quickly returned to his ordinary form and stood up. Did he read my intentions? Clutching his chest, Mahito breathed heavily as he tried to recover. If I carry on like this, I'll certainly die. I need to get Itadori Yuji away. Mahito, giving a small smile, opened his mouth and began to regurgitate something. But while he was hoping that he would have time to finish the process of expelling the shrunken humans from his stomach, his eyes widened when the two sorcerers covered the distance between him. You don't hit someone throwing up. Boom! Receiving a sharp punch to his chin, his head was pushed up before another sharp punch pushed him down, making him swallow again. Shit! I need to get away before. About to retreat, his thoughts were interrupted when Nanami's sword struck him squarely in the jaw, Itadori quickly grabbing him by the hair and pulling him into a knee bar before the two sorcerers began to punish him with an unstoppable wave of attacks that drew more and more blood from the curse. But as the incessant attacks continued, Itadori squinted as Mahito threw his head back, the feet of the curse firmly planted on the ground as he seemed about to open his mouth. This is it. Turning to Nanami, Itadori was quick to grab the older sorcerer by the collar of his shirt, throwing him away and confusing him. Domain expansion. Self-embodiment of perfection. Being hit by the curse's expanding domain barrier, Itadori quickly jumped to land firmly on top, his smile widening as a huge amount of cursed energy accumulated in his fist. Itadori, don't do that. Nanami shouted in an attempt to stop him, but it was to no avail as Itadori's fist came down on the barrier, breaking through it and opening a passage through which Itadori fell. Idiot kid! Mahito, who was already angry at having been unable to capture Nanami in his expansion of his domain, felt the veins in his forehead pop as he saw Itadori fall. Shit! I warned you, didn't I? That there wouldn't be a second time. With Sukuna's voice ringing in his mind, Mahito's eyes widened as 3 cuts threatened to split his body in half, his arm hanging by a thin layer of flesh. Falling to his knees, the curse breathed heavily as all the damage to his body finally seemed to hit him. The exhaustion of using the expansion and receiving Sukuna's cuts had been the trigger. Mahito had reached his limit. But that was far from meaning that the fight was over. Because it would only end when one side died. Boom! Being hit by a kick to the face, Mahito rolled backwards while still struggling to restore his body from the cuts, blood exploding from his nose as he stabbed his fingers into the ground to stop his momentum. Shit! If that's the case, I'll use it all at once. Mahito, expanding his body as much as he could at the moment, transformed it into a strange mass of flesh with arms and eyes in a matter of seconds, Itadori looking at it with disgust in his expression as he sped towards the curse. You think turning into a piece of shit is going to save you? Pulling back his fist, Itadori let his cursed energy explode, his teeth clenching as he threw his fist. Boom! As Mahito's massive body exploded like a balloon, Itadori quickly moved his gaze to a manhole cover, his vision catching a small, deformed form of Mahito trying to reach him. And pointing the tip of his finger, Itadori squinted. Ever since he had devoured the finger in Junpei's house, he had realized that his connection with Sukuna's cursed energy had become even stronger. He could feel that he was able to incorporate a small part of the Curse King's technique. He didn't know if it was enough to use his techniques, but he had a small feeling in the back of his mind that he could. It was like a feeling that screamed at him to try. And so he was going to try. At that point, there was no point in not doing it. In the end, he only had himself to gain. Dismantle. Cut. Mahito, about to reach the manhole cover, opened his eyes wide when he felt the flesh of his small body being cut and his only arm being broken in half as he quickly squeezed through the cover. Nanami, who had caught up with him moments before, quickly hit the manhole cover, destroying it and opening the way to the sewer. Shit! Nanami, pulling out the cell phone, quickly dialed Ino. Itadori, who at this point was looking at Nanami with a little fatigue in his eyes, suddenly felt his legs weaken, his body giving way as he held his knee. What a ridiculous waste of cursed energy. Breathing heavily, he tried to get up, but the lack of strength in his muscles made it impossible at that moment. Sukuna, piss off with your ridiculous cursed energy reserves. Let's go after him too, Itadori. Nanami, turning to Itadori, was surprised to see the boy on the ground. Sorry, Nanami. I think I overspent my energy. Putting his hand on the ground, he tried to get up once more, but again, his body gave way. Shit, you need to go. He's too weak. Clenching his teeth in anger, he shouted for Nanami to continue. Shit, shit, shit. Squeezing the fabric of his clothes, Itadori frowned. In the end, the cut was too weak. His body was not yet ready to use Sukuna's techniques to their full capacity. But even so, it was certainly an achievement. It meant that he could assimilate the Curse King's techniques. At that moment, he had taken another leap towards becoming strong. It was a shame that he had been unable to kill Mahito in the process. My son. Junpei. I want my son. Please, Junpei. Itadori could feel the agony of what had once been a loving, protective mother with her son. Nagi Yoshino, that's what she called herself. At least, that's what she used to call herself, before Mahito turned her into a giant pile of flesh who lived only because she wanted to see her son one last time. Itadori had no words to describe it. Seeing her suffer only made him feel guiltier. All of this, all the deaths at the school, including Junpei's death, and his mother's horrible fate, were his responsibility. He could never escape it. It was something that, from that day on, he would live with for the rest of his life. And he understood that very well. As a grown man, he knew that he had responsibilities and that his actions affected not only him but also the people around him. But now, living as an Itadori, he had to understand that his actions didn't only put the people around him at risk, but also people who had nothing to do with him. The curses, especially Mahito, would not hesitate to kill thousands just to affect him. The only thing that mattered to them was Sukuna, and Itadori had to deal with that. He was now a sorcerer, and many people would depend on him. The future of his allies, and of thousands of people, depended on how far he could go and how much advantage he could bring to the sorcerer's side. He knew he couldn't do everything himself, but as long as he became stronger, he felt confident that he wouldn't let something like this happen again. Approaching the now deformed woman, Itadori let his hand rest gently on her skin. And for a moment, she seemed to cease her pleas for her son, letting the silence become palpable in the air. Forgive me, Miss Yoshino. Itadori apologized honestly in the face of that silence. I was unable to save your son. In that situation, he couldn't do much to save the woman from her condition, but the least he could do was let her rest in peace. He didn't want to keep her alive so that she would continue to suffer. But I promise you that I will avenge him, so please rest now. Letting the cursed energy flow from his arm into the woman's body, Itadori closed his eyes as her breathing gradually began to weaken. I hope you can find your son on the other side. But as the woman slowly closed her eyes to enter an eternal sleep, Itadori opened his eyes when a female voice, different from the distorted one before, sounded from in front of him. Thank you very much. And it was with a final thank you that that beautiful woman said goodbye to this world. Happy to have the chance to meet his son again. Goodbye, Miss Yoshino. Slowly opening his eyes to see a bloody scene, Sukuna could see the ribs of what must have been a skeleton stretching endlessly around him. This was his innate domain, the place he was confined to as long as he was tied to the boy. Yuji Itadori. So in the end, he really did assimilate part of my cursed technique. Sitting on his throne, Sukuna scratched his chin with an indifferent look. How interesting. Seeing the boy using his cursed technique really surprised Sukuna. It wasn't something he expected to happen, but from the looks of it, the boy must have had a really special body. That, as interesting as it was annoying. Even though Itadori had caught his interest, seeing him use his technique so carelessly irritated him. What's more, such an insignificant boy using my technique. It gets on my nerves. He couldn't accept that the boy would eventually completely assimilate his cursed technique. That would be like a punch in the gut to his pride. Sukuna refused to allow it. But it doesn't matter. It's only a matter of time. But letting those words hang in the air, he let his chin rest on his fist, his eyes slowly closing so that he could return to sleep. Congratulations, Yuji. Walking through the corridors of the house in which he was being kept, he was surprised when Gojo suddenly appeared from behind him. "Oh, Gojo-sensei." Turning to look at Gojo, Itadori saw the man with a small smile on his lips. "You've become much stronger, Yuji. I'm congratulating you on that." Gojo, with his usual cheerful attitude, took something from his back and showed it to Itadori. A knife, brand new. Itadori blinked as he saw the blade being placed in front of him, and taking it from Gojo's hands, he noticed that there was nothing very special about it. What's that supposed to mean? He soon realized that it wasn't really a gift, his eyes flicking forward to see Gojo crack a dangerous smile. "We still have 15 days until the Goodwill event, so until then, you will learn how to perfectly imbue your cursed energy into a cursed object." Itadori didn't show much reaction to the teacher's words, his eyes roaming over the blade in his hands for a moment before his attention returned to the man. "And I'll warn you straight away, it's not going to be easy. Follow me." Seeing Gojo turn around and start sprinting away, Itadori turned to a clock on the wall, which read exactly 11 p.m. Scratching his head in irritation, he began to follow the teacher. Has he gone mad? What a load of crap. You learned in 3 days. I expected you to take at least until the festival. In the middle of a training room, Itadori watched the cursed energy flicker around the knife Gojo had given him. But unlike other times, when the cursed energy would be flowing chaotically, this time it was flowing through the blade in a controlled manner, an indication of his newfound control over his cursed energy. Gojo, just a few meters away from him, although he was very pleased with the boy's performance, couldn't help but be a little annoyed. He had planned for this training to last at least a whole week, so now he would have to think about something else instead of relaxing, which was what he had planned for the rest of the week. Another mission, perhaps. No, the last one had been too chaotic. Gojo wanted Itadori to be able to put these memories aside while he could concentrate on something else. In fact, that was the whole point of this training. Itadori already had decent control over the flow of his cursed energy. Teaching him to imbue cursed energy into melee weapons wasn't really necessary, since Gojo had realized that the boy's talent lay in his fists. But Gojo wanted to distract his student's mind. Itadori might be good at hiding his own thoughts, but the sorcerer could see that he was quite distressed by the events of a few days ago. But his whole plan had fallen apart after Itadori learned so quickly. Scratching his head, Gojo was clearly thinking about what he should do from that moment on. But while he was having his own internal monologue, Itadori seemed distracted by something else. And to think I actually managed to use Sukuna's technique. Itadori hadn't stopped to think about what had happened at the school over the last few days, because he was still feeling a bit bad about the events. The training with Gojo had served to distract him for a while. But at this point, he couldn't simply ignore the skill he had just acquired. A technique that could completely change the course of events to come. The innate technique of the King of Curses. Looking at his hand with little emotion on his face, Itadori remembered the feeling of using Dismantle for the first time. That feeling of having a gigantic part of your cursed energy reserve swallowed up in one go, only to end up with a cut that hadn't even served to break a weakened mojito in half. Even if he now had access to the cuts, they would only serve Itadori as a support. He could tell that because his body hadn't been completely enveloped by Sukuna's technique, his cuts were still too weak. Using them in the same way as Sukuna would simply be an unnecessary waste of energy. Perhaps the cleave would work better, but Itadori wasn't sure he would be able to use it so soon. It was a level above what he had even mastered. No, this wasn't a technique for him to concentrate on just yet. Perhaps he could use it from time to time to understand it better, to practice it so that he could learn to throw slashes with more and more control. But doing so wouldn't increase his bond with Sukuna's technique. Eating more and more fingers would. Besides, he had other things to concentrate on. Your own innate mastery. Hi. Earth to Yuji. Is anyone there? Blinking as a hand waved in front of his face, Itadori turned to look at Gojo with a small smile. "You seem to be thinking too much." Itadori, hearing the man say it, slowly turned to face his palms. "Your innate domain." Itadori wasn't originally supposed to have it. It was something completely new and quite exciting. But the situation wasn't very positive, since he didn't have any knowledge about it, and he didn't think he could do anything new. Maybe that's why he was able to use Sukuna's technique so quickly. Was this his innate technique? The ability to assimilate the techniques of sorcerers and curses? Itadori had no idea. He was the last person who could answer any of these questions. But fortunately, he had someone who could at least enlighten his mind a little. He was considered the most powerful sorcerer of the modern era. Gojo Satoru, who was right in front of him. "Sensei, I need to tell you something." And what kind of idiot would he be if he wasted it? When the door of a restaurant was opened, a bell sounded, which caught the attention of most of the customers in the place. Curious, their attention quickly turned back to their own tables when they saw a boy who seemed to be wearing some kind of strange uniform, his black, oddly combed hair giving him an emo boy aura. Most of them thought there was nothing special about this new visitor. "Hey, Fushiguro. This way." Megumi, who was looking around for someone, turned when he heard his name, his eyes landing on an Itadori waving at him from a table. "I guess you got ahead of yourself, didn't you?" Megumi, who soon approached the table, narrowed his eyes when he saw a plate of ramen in front of Itadori. Sorry about that." Itadori rubbed the back of his neck with a small smile when Megumi made the remark. "You took your time, and I was hungry." With a sigh, Megumi sat down opposite his companion, Itadori, signaling for the waiter to serve them. "How have you been?" Megumi was quick to ask. It had been over a month since they had last seen each other, so it was only natural that he should want to know how his friend was doing. And Itadori, hearing that question, seemed to hesitate to open his mouth for a moment before a small smile appeared on his lips. "I'm fine, how are you and Kujisaki?" "No." Something had happened, Megumi could tell that clearly. He already had some suspicions when Gojo seemed to avoid telling him about Yuji's missions, but now, Megumi was completely sure. Something bad had happened. Sigh. But with a sigh, he decided to let it go. He wasn't someone who would force someone else to say what was bothering them. "We're doing well, we've been practicing for the exchange between the schools with the second-year students." Itadori nodded, and eating some of his noodles, he returned his attention to Megumi. "You seem to have gotten stronger." Itadori commented as he looked at his friend a little more closely. "It looks like you've been practicing a lot." Megumi crossed his arms, his eyes resting on the table for a few seconds while he seemed lost in thought. He hadn't stopped thinking about the events at boarding school. Even though he knew he had no chance of winning, he still couldn't help but feel guilty. In order to escape, Itadori had stayed behind. Megumi had abandoned a companion just so he could save himself. Pathetic, that had been pathetic, even for someone like him. He didn't want that to happen again. He wanted to become stronger, for himself, for his own goals, but also for the people close to him. "Itadori, I'm not going to lose anymore." That was his goal, at least for now. Itadori blinked at the boy's sudden declaration, his smile widening as he nodded. "That's good, because I have no intention of losing again either." "You already have an idea of how the event works, don't you?" Walking through Jujutsu High, Gojo asked Yuji beside him, the boy looking around with a little interest. Nanami gave me a brief summary. 2 months had passed and Itadori had finally returned to school. A lot had happened, which gave him the impression that much more time had passed since he had last set foot in the place. He felt he had to familiarize himself with his surroundings again. "That's good, because I made sure to deliver the souvenirs in advance. So I brought you at short notice." Itadori blinked, his eyes narrowing as he turned to the teacher. "Wait, How long until the event starts? 30 minutes. Then I think you'd better hurry up and meet the rest of the students. Itadori's eyes widened, and before Gojo could wave goodbye, the boy disappeared, running at full speed as he tried to sense the cursed energy of Megumi or Nobara. Got it. And it wasn't long before he found them, a vein popping in his forehead when he realized they were gathered on the other side of the school. He brought me to the other side of the school on purpose? Idiot. Gojo, watching his student disappear, suddenly sneezed, which made him look around curiously. He's late. On the school premises, the students of Tokyo Jujutsu High were all gathered so that they could come up with a plan to win the tournament. And while they were waiting for the only one of them to show up, Maki was the one who declared that he was late. Do you think something's happened? Nobara, showing his concern, asked Megumi, who was sitting while watching the entrance. I can't say. But without knowing what could have happened, he simply declared his lack of knowledge. Ugh. With a grunt, Maki sat down while resting her chin on her fist, clearly impatient. What do you think we should do? With a new member, we need to change our strategies. Well, that will depend on what he can do, said Panda, who was hugging a support beam. He's been training with Sensei for the past 2 months, so he's certainly stronger. Megumi, watching the two of them discuss how to implement Itadori's plans, remembered what had happened at boarding school. Itadori was extraordinarily resistant, and even though he was unable to use cursed energy to strengthen his body, he was still able to withstand countless attacks from a special level curse, as well as exchange blows, even if he didn't damage the curse. With all this in mind, he was confident about saying the next words. But even before that, if everyone from Tokyo and Kyoto High School fought without using cursed energy, then I'm sure Itadori would win. Maki, seeing Megumi say it so confidently, cracked a small smile. Considering that he had faced to do, it wasn't hard to believe his words. Interesting. But as they looked to discuss including Itadori in the plans after the information from Megumi, they turned towards the entrance when the sound of dragging rang out. Sorry for the delay. Taking a deep breath, Itadori revealed himself as he walked through the door, sweat dripping down his face as if he had just run a marathon. How long do we have before the tournament starts? 25 minutes. Panda simply spoke, which caused Itadori to open his mouth in disbelief. What? I got here so fast. Shit, I should have saved my energy, now I feel as sweaty as a pig. Moving through the group, Itadori sat down next to Nobara. But as he took a deep breath, he didn't notice the looks he was getting from the second-year students. Watchful eyes, mainly with suspicion. After all, he was the receptacle of Sukuna, the most powerful curse that had ever lived. It was normal for them to feel suspicious of him. They didn't know when he might lose control. Hey, Itadori. But as Itadori caught his breath, his eyes flew open when he heard his voice being called, his head turning to see Nobara beside him. I heard that you and Fushiguro went out to eat a few days ago. Itadori, remaining silent, sensed that the conversation had just entered dangerous territory. Why does that remind me? And you didn't even have the decency to invite me, did you? When I did something wrong and my wife scolded me? Itadori, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, gave a nervous smile as he raised his hands in defense. Oh, you know how it is. Sensei asked me not to invite more than one person at a time. Gojo hadn't said anything about it. Itadori just needed an excuse to get out of it. But from the intense look he was getting, it didn't seem to work. Next time, you'll pay for everything, Nobara declared, which made Itadori's eyes widen as he remembered the amount of food she had eaten during their first mission. I could go bankrupt at any moment. Seeing the interaction between the two, the second-year students immediately realized that Itadori was definitely not a threat to them. In fact, at that moment, Nobara seemed much more threatening. Alright, since you're here, we can finally work out our plan, Maki said, drawing everyone's attention. Then pay close attention. TheJiujitsuGuy will surely come straight for us and try to crush us. He's a monster, and I'm afraid that even if we faced him together, we'd still be annihilated. So we were thinking of leaving Panda or Fushiguro to slow him down, but Itadori, we'll leave that to you. You don't have to beat him. Just delay him. You can go all out. Panda nodded. Itadori nodded. From his memories, he must have been someone very strong. Itadori could say that if it had been him a few days ago, he might not have had any hope of beating him. But at this point, that mistrust of victory was gone. He was sure he could beat him, and even then, there would be enough energy left so that he could deal with Hanami later. But in any case, victory was not his goal. He would just hold it long enough for the curse attack to begin. Then he would use TheJiujitsuGuy's support to exorcise Hanami. Letting her escape was out of the question. Gathered at the entrance to the forest, the Tokyo group awaited the start of the tournament. With all the strategy in place, each of them already knew what had to be done. And while there were still a few minutes to go, they decided to talk to each other. Yuji. But while Itadori was talking to Megumi and Nobara, he turned around when he heard his name and saw Maki standing in front of him. I forgot to ask you when we were working out the plan. Raising her hand, Maki spread her fingers in a sign of wanting something. Give me back my Tozuma. Itadori, listening to the girl's request, took a while to understand what she wanted, but soon his mind went back to the events at the boarding school, when the knife he was using broke trying to cut the special grade curse. And he quickly remembered that it must have belonged to Maki. It broke. But at this point, there was no point in lying, so Itadori was quite direct in his words. But from Maki's inexpressive face, perhaps being so direct wasn't the best option. Broken? Megumi and Nobara were quick to move away, which caused Itadori to look at them in disbelief. While the situation looked like it was going to get a little intense, Itadori felt relieved when the megaphone sounded. Only 1 minute until the event starts. Stay with the voice of the lovely Yutahime-sensei as she encourages you. It's inevitable that some people will get hurt, so help yourselves and time's up. What? Hey, Gojo. And now the tournament begins. With the start of the event declared, the group moved quickly, advancing into the forest together. Wait for the signal to split up into groups. We're counting on you, Yuji. Maki spoke, Itadori nodding. Woof. Megumi's black wolf followed in front of the group, stopping when a curse that resembled a spider descended in front of them through a web on a branch. A weak curse, Panda noticed, and Maki quickly drew his spear. Senpai. Wait. But before she could advance, Megumi called out to her as her wolf barked in distress. Boom. And suddenly appearing as some trees were destroyed, TheJiujitsuGuy showed himself to them with a huge smile. Great. Everyone's here. Come on. Come and face me all at once. But before he could go any further, his eyes widened as a shoe came up in front of his face, hitting him in a way that threw his head back and made him stagger. Break it up. All bewildered, the group quickly split up, leaving only Itadori to face the first-degree sorcerer. That was a great hit. Shaking his head, TheJiujitsuGuy blew his nose to expel the accumulated blood, a smile widening on his lips. I did good damage. Itadori noticed, and getting into position, he prepared for a counterattack. As long as I don't get hit in any vital spots, I can hold him off for as long as it takes. Now I'm going to strike back, first timer. Itadori raised his defense as the sorcerer raised his fist, immediately preparing to receive the attack. Receive that. Boom. The spider curse, appearing in front of the fist at the last moment, exploded into pieces, Itadori's defense receiving the full brunt of the punch. What strength! His body pushed back, and Itadori kept his feet firmly on the ground, a smile on his lips as he swung his arms to shake off the numbness caused by the impact. It's even stronger than the attacks of that special grade curse. You really resisted my punch? Wonderful. What's your name? Tadu was amazed that the first year in front of him had been able to withstand one of his punches so easily. He could tell immediately that the boy was definitely someone who could amuse him. Itadori Yuji. Right. So, Itadori Yuji. I have a question for you. Tadu, with all his strange mannerisms, prepared to ask the question that would seal his opponent's fate. What's your ideal type of woman? Yes. I'd forgotten that he asks that kind of question. Itadori, suddenly receiving that question, stopped to think of an answer. Actually, I don't think I ever stopped to think about it. In his old life, Mark had met an incredible woman, who had been with him from high school through to adulthood. His wife was an incredible woman in many ways. Beautiful, but above all, mentally strong. Perhaps this was the trait that had attracted him to her the most. Even in the worst moments of his life, there she was, firmly supporting him, as if she had unshakable confidence in him. Shit, I'm getting a bit emotional. Focus. But in the end, he knew that this would not be an answer to everyone's liking. He needed to simplify as robustly as possible. He needed to detail his wife's body in the crudest way possible. My kind of woman? Itadori, staring at Tadu intensely, simply stated. A woman with an athletic body and big thighs, like Gina Carano. Tadu, hearing that answer full of sincerity, froze for a moment. Memories that had never happened had just invaded his mind. Filled for a time with Itadori, which had never happened. It seems that the two of us are best friends. Strange, Itadori thought as he watched the tears run down the sorcerer's face. But unable to think too much about the situation, Itadori went on alert when he felt the cursed energy of other sorcerers surge towards him, his eyes narrowing as he turned to the trees to see the Kyoto students in the branches. So they're still planning to kill me, are they? Running as numerous shots threatened to hit him, Itadori quickly noticed Miwa in front of him about to draw her sword. New shadow style, simple dash. But before the girl could complete her attack, Itadori surprised her by appearing in front of her in an instant, grabbing her wrist and throwing her away, completely undoing her technique. He just ignored me? Standing on the ground, the girl watched Itadori walk away with an impassive face. But as Itadori continued to walk away, he turned his head when he noticed Mekamaru jump up beside him, his eyes narrowing as the puppet raised its palm to form what looked like some kind of energy beam. But before he could complete the attack, Yuji's palm hit him squarely in the stomach, his body flying between the trees. Palm. Kamo, about to shoot with his bow, was surprised when he found himself on the ground, his head turning to see Itadori on the branch where he had been seconds before. Hey, I told you, didn't I? Kamo, jumping up to dodge a punch from Tadu, turned to the first-degree sorcerer. That I'd kill anyone who got in my way. No, you didn't. Whatever. Get out of here. Kamo, seeing that Tadu had no intention of turning back, just gave up. In the end, he knew he didn't stand a chance. You have to kill him. But before he retreated, he didn't forget to say. That will depend entirely on him. With a smile, Tadu stood in front of Itadori again. Let's keep going, my friend.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.